Hello, hello, and hi, and welcome to another hybrid show, we should call it, of things we said today and Talk More Talk. Kid O'Toole, who joins Darren and myself on Talk More Talk, will join us later in the program. We have a very special guest that we will welcome in a few minutes from now. But first, let me introduce my two other regular co-hosts. Allan Kozinn, who you know for the McCartney Legacy series that he co-wrote with Adrian Sinclair, volumes one and two so far, with more to come. And also in the past, he wrote The Beatles from the Cavern to the Rooftop and Got That Something, How I Want to Hold Your Hand Changed Everything. And for many years, wrote for the New York Times in their classical department and for Beatle articles too. Alan,
Hello,
welcome back.
Ken, and hello, Darren, and hello,
Hey, Alan.
everyone out there.
And we've got Darren DeVivo with us, who has been a veteran of radio for about 44, 45 years, as long as I've been
Actually,
doing it.
Thursday, the 26th of February, will be the 42nd anniversary of my debut on that other station I was
Yeah.
at forever. So
Okay.
that's 42 years officially now. But hey, who's counting?
And you could hear him Friday nights from 7 to 11 on WKZE with his new program called Noises in the Valley, a freeform show where he programs all the music. That doesn't happen too often
Yeah,
in radio, where the DJ programs the music. Anyway, he's been part of things we said today for many years now. How you doing?
good. Thank you, Ken. How are you, Alan? And we do have a very special show here just ahead.
Okay. And if you don't know, I'm Ken Michaels. I have a radio show on the Beatles I've been doing for almost 44 years called Every Little Thing. Also, I do Talk More Talk with Darren and Kit and this show, and I have my own YouTube channel, Ken Michaels Radio. We're going to welcome, as I said, a very important person in the Beatle world, a great guest to have on. If you're watching this on YouTube, just look below us and you'll see his name right there. Anyway, it's not going to be a big surprise. But he's great to have anytime, anywhere, and we'll bring him on in just a few moments. But first, as usual, we have the latest Beatle news. A second screening of Paul McCartney's documentary Man on the Run was added for February 23rd to meet the popular demand. This Friday, February 27th, the film will be streamed on Amazon Prime. On the same day, the soundtrack album for Man on the Run will be released with three tracks not released before, a rough mix of Arrow Through Me, Gotta Sing, Gotta Dance from the James Paul McCartney TV special, and a live version of Live and Let Die from the concert film of Rock Show, which actually was released, but this is in audio format. According to Calico Skies Radio, I love the name of that station there, Calico Skies. Scott Roger, I'm not sure if he's like an acting manager for Paul. Do you know who Scott
He's his
Roger is?
manager. Yeah.
He is his manager. Okay. He reports that Paul's new album is finished. The only reason it's not available yet is that Paul has spent some time on the cover art. Scott also said that Chrissie Hynde will be contributing backing vocals on the album and that Paul will be touring later this year. He'll be playing in Japan and elsewhere. This
Wow.
was also repeated in Beatle Fan as well. Also, where Wings are concerned, don't have too many details about this, but there will be a Paul McCartney and Wings exhibit on display at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And this is going to start May the 15th. Don't have an end date for it, but it does start May the 15th, and it will include contributions from MPL and from various members of Wings. Okay? On February the 10th, the DVD Blu-ray was released for Mark Lewisohn's Evolver 62, covering the year in full detail, taken from his live shows recorded in 2022 at the Bloomsbury Theatre in London. You can stream Mark's film at Apple TV, Google Play, Fandango, Amazon US and UK, and on Tubi. Let's have a strange suspicion we're going to hear from Mark fairly soon about this. Don't forget the new documentary on Billy Preston is now in select theaters. That's the way God planned it. It is running at the New York City Film Forum now through this Friday. They are adding more theaters that will be running it. And so far, I see it's through June 17th. I won't be seeing it till it plays in Connecticut, which is March 25th through the 27th, and Hartford. But you can go to billyprestonfilm.com for more information. No info on whether or not there'll be a DVD, Blu-ray, or streaming anywhere, at least not yet. Yoko Ono's 1981 album, Season of Glass, released shortly after John's murder or assassination. Season of Glass is being reissued. The CD will include three bonus tracks, her home demo for her song I Don't Know Why, a never before released Phil Spector mix of her song Dogtown, plus her hit single of Walking on Thin Ice. You can pre-order this now, but it won't be shipped until the summer this year. And there will be a white vinyl release available by mail order only. This will be on the Chimera music label. I think it's pronounced Chimera. That's Sean's label. For more information, go to chimeramusic.com. Chimera is Chimera, music.com, and hit the shop tab. A new book is coming out on September the 10th this year called Across the Universe, The Magic and Mystery of the Beatles' Creativity by Steve Taylor. Amazon UK says that this is the story of the Beatles from an entirely new angle and is an appreciation of the psychological, spiritual, and cultural forces that they harness to access their own genius. The book is packed with surprising insights into the Beatles' journey and an invitation to experience the Beatles' brilliance anew. Thanks, as always, to our good friend John Mazzini for that information. There's Ken Womack news. He is currently working on a new book on the events for Beatle fans that happened in 1974 with Jason Krupa, whom he collaborated on with the book All Things Must Pass Away, Harrison Clapton, and Other Assorted Love Songs. And he's working with Scott Fryman, known for his Deconstructing the Beatles series, on two books with lots of detailed information on the Beatles recordings. More on that as we hear it. And last November, Ken Womack held an Everything Fab Four convention to celebrate the 60th anniversary of Rubber Soul. It is official. He will do it again sometime this November to celebrate the 60th anniversary of Revolver. No details on location yet or exact dates, but we'll let you know as soon as we hear. Like the Fest for Beatle fans, Ken's Everything Fab Four conventions mix interesting panel discussions with live performances. Speaking of books, the editor for Beatle Fan magazine, Bill King, tells us he's writing a book on his 60 plus years of being a Beatle fan, including many of his personal experiences and articles he's written in Beatle Fan. We'll be finding out more as we get closer to the release date. Mainstays for Beatle Fan, Wally Podrazik, Al Sussman, and Brad Hunt are contributing to the book. A reminder that our good friend, Jeff Slate, will be doing a concert for George Harrison's birthday, which is actually tomorrow, February 25th, but the concert is on Friday, February 27th at Cafe Wa in New York City. Also, I've been told from our good friend Charles Rosenay that he is putting on a show called The Birth, Death, and Rebirth of the Beatles. This is a multimedia show happening at the Hageman Library in East Haven, Connecticut on March the 4th. He's working on this with musician and filmmaker Kevin Soling. More on that as I hear. In fact, I'll be interviewing both Charles and Kevin tomorrow on my YouTube channel, Ken Michaels Radio, to talk about this new multimedia show. Speaking of Charles, he's putting on a new Monkees convention, which is happening September 4th through the 6th at Clarion Inn Hotel in North Haven, Connecticut. This is in celebration of the 60th anniversary this year of the Monkees. For more information, write to monkeysfanconvention@gmail.com. I know many of you Beatle fans are Monkees fans. That's why I included that in my news. One final thing, if you're a fan of the band Squeeze, they put out a lot of great music since the late 70s. They were on a TV show by the BBC called In Radio 2 Piano Room. And on that show, they covered Junior's Farm.
Hmm.
How cool is that?
Yeah.
Because we used to do
Yeah.
Junior's Farm. You can watch that on YouTube, by the way. All
They
right,
have a
that's
new
all.
album.
They do? They have a
They
new
have
one?
a new album out called, yeah, that's about to come out as
Okay.
well. So
I
Trick
wonder.
Trixies, I think is the name of it. If I think it's an album that Chris Difford and Glenn Tilbrook wrote before they were Squeeze, when they were still very young. They hadn't started up a band yet. They were novice musicians, but they wrote like an album, and now have finally recorded it. Something to that effect. Trixies.
Not Norton's.
No.
It's Trixie's. Anyway, that's a great idea for an album. We'll see if Junior's Farm makes it. Well, if it's all original, then it won't. But
Yeah, I don't know.
there you go. That's all the news we have for you right now. And Alan will work his magic and give you that twirly little thing.
Really
And
thing.
Kit's going to appear too.
That's
That's
right.
right.
Just like that with our special guest. Here we
Double
go.
whirl.
And as promised, we have a very special guest to welcome here to Things We Said Today and Talk More Talk. He's Mark Lewisohn. And if you don't know the name Mark Lewisohn, as Ringo would say, you're in the wrong place. This man has given us some of the best books ever on the Beatles, going back to, and I remember interviewing him when the book The Beatles Live came out, for which he deserves a ton of credit. Just documenting all the live performances going back to the Quarrymen days up through Candlestick Park. There was the Beatles recording sessions, the Beatles Chronicles, and more recently, Tune In. And also, a few years ago, he was involved with a show where he talked about 1962 and all the events that happened that year in just a couple hours' time. And that show has just been released on DVD, Blu-ray, and also it's being streamed on a number of channels. I got it all written down here somewhere. It's on Apple TV, Google Play, Fandango, Amazon US, Amazon UK, and Tubi. Anyway, that's a long enough introduction. Let's welcome Mark Lewisohn to our show.
Hello, hello. Thank you for having me.
It's an honor to have you here, Mark. You know,
Absolutely.
Hmm.
and so we're going to talk right now about this new show, well, from a few years ago,
Yeah,
and it's called Evolver 62. And when it comes to the Beatles, every single year, certainly
yeah.
from 62 on, is packed with so many events. They were so busy. Why did you decide to start doing this? And I'm sure a lot of people were wondering, this might get in the way of the follow-up books for Tune In.
Yeah, it kind of has got in the way, or did get in the way slightly. I mean, it's the film is out now, but the actual event was October 22, so it's 3.5 years ago almost. I did it because fundamentally I needed to earn some money
Hmm.
in order to carry on writing. Um, Book publishing contracts, typically you get paid on delivery and on publication. And since the delivery of volume two of my trilogy is taking so very long, uh, I don't have an obvious source of income.
Mm,
So I have to, every once in a while, I have to go and earn some money in order to carry on writing the books. And this was an idea to, I did a tour in 2019 for the 50th anniversary of the Abbey Road album called Hornsey Road.
mm,
Um, it was a good thing to do and it earned me the money to keep going for quite a while, but it took quite a chunk out of my writing time. So when it came to then COVID happened. So nothing happened in 20 or 21.
sure.
But I revived the idea in 22, and the idea then was 60 years on since 62. And I thought that I would actually do an annual thing of Evolver 63 celebrating 1963, Evolver 64 in 2024, all the way up to Evolver 70 in 2030.
Hmm.
But what happened was that Evolver 62 again took quite a long time to prepare. Evolver 63 was my intent, my method of really cutting down on the prep time so that it didn't eat into my writing time so much.
Hmm.
But it still did. And so when it got to 2024, I just looked at it and went, I haven't got the time for this. So I haven't done one since. I've missed 24, I've missed 25, and I'm going to miss 26. And basically that's it. My idea kind of ended with two shows.
Well, when you're done with the books, you can just go back and start 63 and work your way up.
Yeah, I could do that for maybe the 70th anniversaries in 2033. I did do Evolver 63. That was me on stage, did five shows with five a different guest each time, so five different guests, looking at Beatles archive stuff on a big screen for people in the audience to look at.
You also have
Hardly,
one
hardly
prepared
any
for
prep
for
time.
68.
That's very true.
Right.
This all, thank you, Alan. You've reminded me. This all began. The reason I did Hornsey Road is because I did the White
Right.
Album presentation at Ken Womack's 2018 Monmouth University White Album Symposium.
Hmm.
Yep.
We were there.
And
Yep.
when I got home from that, I went for dinner. There's a British comedian called Harry Hill, and he's a big fan of Tune In and wanted to meet me. And I met him for dinner one evening together with his manager and his agent. And they're all Beatles fans, and more than I realized. In fact, that's true of a lot of people.
Mhm.
And I said I've just got back from Monmouth, New Jersey, and I presented this 68 White Album talk, but it took longer than I meant it to. And the agent said, "Well, you could present it over here since you've done the work." But by the time when we looked at it, the year was almost over, and it would have been celebrating an anniversary a bit too late. So he said, "But you could anticipate the next anniversary and do Abbey Road." And that's why I did the Hornsey Road show.
Hmm.
But I mean, I had an idea for 2026 to celebrate the centenary of George Martin's birth with a show about George Martin. And I was going to tour some British theatres doing that with a couple of friends to help me. Not much prep time, about a week maybe two at the outside. And then the shows themselves. And I realized that I was going to be preparing it and then touring it, literally sitting backstage in theatres, killing time as you have to do, thinking I should be at my desk. What am I
Hmm.
doing here? I should be at my desk. So I decided against it. Didn't do it.
Mm.
It's very addicting wanting to do all these different projects, and you only have so much time.
Yeah, if I could clone myself, I'd certainly do the shows because I enjoy doing them and the public enjoys seeing them. I mean, part of the appeal is that I've got this huge archive of stuff which I use to support my work, but it doesn't usually get seen.
Hmm.
Uh, it informs my writing, but it stays unseen apart from by me. The Evolver 62, if you see the film, what you'll see is I open my filing cabinet almost
Yeah.
literally, bring out this stuff and let you see what I had to use. And it is good stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm.
I'd also have to imagine that if you tried to do one on 63 on, it was so packed with so many events, they were so busy, you couldn't possibly whittle that down in 2 hours.
No, you couldn't. Well, the Evolver 63 show was over 3 hours because I have difficulty keeping things short. I always think, oh, this is interesting. This is too good to leave out. And the Evolver 62, the stage idea was 62 episodes in the life from that year. The film only has about half as many as that. But
Hmm.
what the film has that the stage show didn't have is me going out on location in places. I didn't do that at all for the stage show. I just was on the stage. Mm.
Okay. I have a
Yeah.
couple of questions that I'm going to ask you, and then I'll pass you on to my co-host. But one of the things that I learned, which kind of really surprised me, is that, well, obviously 1962, the Decca audition happened New Year's Day, but you said that Decca actually offered Brian a
Yeah.
contract.
Yeah.
I never
It
heard that.
actually is. It's in the thing about everything in that show is in tune in, but the tune in is so packed with information that you can't retain it all. But
Right.
it is in there. I was I got access to the files of Brian Epstein's what we call solicitor, I guess an attorney, you would say,
Hmm.
um, who had his paperwork from the year that he was looking after Brian, 62-3, um, including all of Brian's initial steps as manager. Amongst the papers was, you know, how attorneys will give you an itemized billing for
Hmm.
their time. And one of the items was perusing Decca agreement. And I thought, well, that's very interesting. A Decca agreement, was that for the Beatles or was it just a standard agreement?
Yeah.
It didn't say. But then a letter turned up. In fact, I'd had it for years and never quite realized the significance of it. From, who's it from? Is it from Brian Epstein to Dick Rowe of
Hmm.
February 1962, saying, despite your offer, I've decided not to put the boys on record with Decca, or words to that effect. So evidently there was the offer of an agreement there. But it wasn't the kind of contract that Brian wanted. It was a kind of under sufferance one that Decca were going to make them pay for their own recording time and their
Oh,
own pressings and all of that. And Brian, that wasn't what Brian wanted. So in the end, technically, he declined Decca and not the other way around. Mm,
Wow.
okay.
yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. You can learn from every single piece of paper. You know, just a couple of lines there, well, in two different documents, add up to a picture that we didn't know about before. Mhm.
Hmm. Okay. Um, I have to say, when reading Tune In, and I've said this to all my friends here, the biggest bombshell, and I don't understand why it wasn't front page news around the world, is how the Beatles got their record contract and
Yeah.
how everything started with Ardmore and Beechwood, and they wanted a publishing deal, and they really were interested in Like Dreamers Do, and somehow that all resulted in them getting a record deal. But when talking about that in Evolver 2, you kind of didn't tell the full story.
It it's complicated. It's such a complicated one that it would have been a hard one to get into. I did want to. I do talk, and in fact, it's in the film about Kim Bennett and the
Yeah,
the lengths he went to make Love Me Do a hit. None of which ever really got mentioned before, apart from the book.
right.
But I do allude a little bit to the unlikely circumstances that led up to George Martin signing them to Parlophone, but I don't really get into the weeds of it. But it is in the book. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm.
I thought it was the most fascinating part of Tune
It
In.
is. Well, it certainly is. It's extraordinary to again put all the pieces together and find out that they don't add up to what we always thought they did, you know.
Okay. When I
Mm.
first interviewed you when Tune In came out, I asked you this question, but it still boggles my mind why the Beatles never recorded Like Dreamers Do for EMI.
Yeah. Well, it's a good question. I don't know the answer to that one. It may have been on the list of numbers that Brian suggested they routine on June the 6th, 62. There's a document of songs that they might do. I don't know how many of those they did do, but four were recorded that day. In fact, there's a tape of that recording's
Mhm.
date that we hopefully will still hear one day. And they were chosen, I think, by Ron Richards and possibly by George Martin. Ron was George's assistant, and it wasn't there. They did what Love Me Do, Ask Me Why, Besame Mucho, and was it P.S. I Love You? I think it might have been. Yeah.
Yeah. But didn't Ardmore and Beechwood say to Brian, we want Like Dreamers Do?
No, well, evidently not. But what they did say was they wanted, and it was understood that they would get the publishing on both sides of the record, and that's what they did get.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
One thing I just want to ask this because I know that I'll forget if I don't bring this up. But wasn't there talk about Jeff Emmerich having some recordings from June the 6th that has never surfaced. And
That's what I mentioned just now when I said there's a tape that we may hear one day. That tape was always believed to be destroyed. Um, Besame Mucho surfaced when they were first doing the Sessions album in the early 80s. No one quite knew where it came from. And then when we were doing the anthology, George Martin found an acetate of Love Me Do that turned out to be from the same session.
right.
So we have two of the four songs, but in fact, there is a half-hour tape that includes full starts and breakdowns of all four numbers. And with the reason we thought it was destroyed is because it was meant to be destroyed. And Jeff Emerick, who was then just basically an office boy at Abbey
Uh-huh.
Road, a gopher, um, the studio junior, was dispatched to go and trash all these tapes, and just thought to himself, "I think I'll keep that one." So he kept it and didn't tell anybody at all ever that he had kept it. So even when we were working on the anthology and he was engineering, he never volunteered that he had it, although that was an obvious time when we could have used it. But it surfaced after his death, and there's been a battle ever since then with, I think, Universal Music and the Emmerich estate as to the ownership of it. And I don't know, it's gone very quiet. It's a couple of years since I've heard anything. Don't
Yeah.
know what's happened there. Maybe they've settled and not said anything. I don't know.
But it's strictly those four songs and outtakes from them, nothing else.
Yeah, an image of the tape box got went around, so we can see what's on it, but we know 5 minutes of that audio
Hmm.
from the anthology, but we
Right.
don't have the other 25, and it's with Pete on drums. It's tantalizing. I don't really care who owns it as long as we get to hear it.
Hmm.
You know,
It'll turn up somehow.
I pray that it does.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Have you tried
Okay.
to
Well, I'm
get
the
Jeff
praying
Emmerich's
kind.
wife to play it for you?
No, no, Jeff Emerick's wife died before he did.
Oh, okay. So
It might be
who
a
is administering?
sibling, possibly a sibling, a
Mm,
sister, perhaps. I'm thinking, not someone I know personally.
mhm.
But now that it's a subject of a tense legal battle, I don't think that they dare, play it to anybody. So I've never heard it. I don't think any of us have heard it. I don't think anybody's heard it really. But how extraordinary that Jeff had it all those years and never volunteered that information.
Hmm.
Mm.
Interesting.
So you found out about it after the anthology? He never said anything before the anthology?
Oh, I only found out about it about 5 years ago when suddenly it became a bit of I think it was publicized as being a legal tussle.
Hmm.
And a couple of people, I think Ken Townsend was called to give evidence. A few people did affidavits for it. And I think at one point I might have been called, but I wasn't.
Mm,
So I'm strictly neutral on it. I just want to hear it.
yeah.
Okay.
Mm.
Maybe one of these days.
Ken, I
Well,
wanted to
I
jump
don't know.
off.
Yes, go ahead, Darren.
I'm sorry. Ken, I wanted to jump off that because you did bring up Kim Bennett. And in my notes, I wanted Mark to elaborate a bit more about Kim Bennett, Ardmore, and Beechwood and their role in Love Me Do and the lengths that you make mention of in the film about Kim Bennett's role in helping Love Me Do become the hit that it was.
Yeah, with twofold. First of all, without Ardmore and Beechwood, and especially Kim Bennett, the Beatles wouldn't have got a contract. That's the first leg of their involvement. And it basically comes from Brian Epstein. This is a quite a familiar story. He goes to the HMV record store on Oxford Street, which is HMV's flagship record shop. And there was a disc cutting service
Right.
offered there. And he knew the manager of that store because he'd been on a retail management course in Hamburg, funnily enough, with the manager of that shop in 1961. And Brian had popped into the top 10 club and seen the Beatles momentarily in Hamburg in 61, which nobody ever mentioned, but I know it happened. Um, but he goes into the HMV shop to get the tape of the Beatles Decca test cut to wax, 78 RPM discs. And the man doing the cutting, Brian must have said, "Oh, these are written by two of the group that I manage." And that was my Brian Epstein impression, by the way. And the guy said, "Who's publishing these?" And Brian said, "Nobody yet." And he said, "Well, on the top floor of this shop is the Ardmore and Beechwood Music Publishing Company. Why don't you go up there after you've got your discs cut?" Brian went up there, played the discs, said that these were unpublished songs, and they said, "We'd like to publish them." And Brian said, "Thank you very much, but it's really a recording contract that I'm after. The publishing can follow, but in the first instance, let's get them a recording contract and then we'll see." So Brian was having no luck getting them a contract and was turned down by everybody, including George Martin. But Ardmore and Beechwood was suddenly backing the case. And Ardmore and Beechwood was wholly owned subsidiary of EMI. It was actually a capital company, but it was EMI owned. And so Ardmore and Beechwood agitated within EMI for this group to be signed so that they would get the publishing. And ultimately, for a number of reasons, which takes several pages in the book to explain, George Martin is assigned the Beatles. Having already turned them down in February, suddenly in May, he offers Brian a contract with no contact in between. And Brian doesn't know why he's being offered a contract, but he goes down to London and meets George Martin, and George Martin says, "I'm going to give your boys a contract." And in the film, in the stage show, which you see in the film, there's the requisition form that his secretary typed and George, I think, signed, or maybe the secretary did, for the contract to be, the terms of the contract to be drawn up. And he calls them the Beatles with two T's.
Yes.
Later on in the film, the Abbey Road tape librarian calls them the Beatless.
Beatless,
Two
yes.
S's.
Ouch.
So no one can get it right. Yeah. So they are the Beatles, and they get issued this contract. And Brian Epstein literally takes his fountain pen crosses out one of the T's to make it Beatles,
Okay.
and then signs the contract on the back page. And that is the Beatles recording agreement. But it was really because of Kim Bennett and Sid Coleman, his boss, their agitation that the Beatles be given a contract. And that's why they got the publishing, because they had been the movers of it. Then the record comes out, Love Me Do and P.S. I Love You, both sides published by Ardmore and Beechwood. And Ardmore and Beechwood, George Martin does nothing to make it a hit. He doesn't like it. He doesn't like Love Me Do. As Kim Bennett said to me, well, then just think about it. Why did he release it if he didn't like it? Well, he released it because he had to release it. But he didn't want to promote it. All the promotion was done by the Beatles themselves, who were out every night playing it somewhere, and by this guy called Kim Bennett, who was moving heaven and earth to get it played on the radio. And superhuman efforts by Kim Bennett to justify his belief in these songs, or that group, this act is what he was supporting. And it was a hit. And when George Martin saw that it was a hit, realized that he liked them anyway as people, but he thought if they've got the right song, then they could go places. And what he does then is marginalize Kim Bennett, pushes him out,
Okay.
and gets the publishing taken up by somebody else instead. Persuades Brian Epstein that Ardmore haven't done a good job on it, whereas in fact they had done a very good job on it. But these things happen in business. And it was to everyone's profit except Ardmore and Beechwood's that the Beatles moved on.
This is such an
Okay.
incomprehensible
Yeah.
thing. I mean, was it a matter of pique for having been forced to sign them and record them, and they hadn't yet become big, and that he then took the publishing and worked it out with Dick James and cut Ardmore and Beechwood out? Was it that just?
Well, the first thing to say is that there's no guarantee. I mean, Brian was not obliged to place the publishing of the next two songs, the A and B side of the next 45, with Ardmore and Beechwood. The contract was for only those two songs and nothing more. It was a song agreement, a music publishing agreement. So just because George Martin steered Brian away from Ardmore and Beechwood doesn't mean Ardmore and Beechwood significantly lost out, because they might not have had the publishing much longer anyway. Brian could have moved on at any time. He was not obliged to stay. But he was encouraged to think they'd done a very poor job. And why? Because George Martin wanted us. the first few months of the Beatles on EMI and Parlophone is very scratchy. Nothing really is working properly. They're not good in the studio, the Beatles. The release of their first record is a mess. I mean, at the end of Love Me Do and P.S. I Love You, they'd actually fulfilled their contract. They'd done 6 sides by then. Um, and that could have been the end of it. And if it hadn't have been a hit, it might have been the end of it. But thankfully, Kim Bennett made it a hit, and the Beatles did too. And George Martin just wanted to wipe the slate clean and start with them on his terms, and also obscure the way that they had been signed. And George Martin had steel. I mean, you might remember from Tune In that on the 26th of November, the Beatles go into EMI and record Please Please Me and Ask Me Why for their second record. That was a Monday. On the Saturday, 2 days before, on the 24th, the first ever edition of a new BBC TV show called That Was the Week That Was had aired. It was the first ever topical satirical comedy show ever on British television and possibly anywhere in the world. And the very first episode had a scathing attack on a record producer called Norrie Paramore, who was George Martin's colleague at EMI. And all the information had been given to David Frost, the then unknown presenter of TW3, by George Martin. That was 2 days before the Please Please Me session. He'd absolutely dumped on a colleague.
Wow.
And embarrassed his colleague tremendously in front of the whole nation. Well, however many million people were watching it. He was a man of steel, George Martin. He was a very nice guy and a very good gentleman and all of that. He was all those things that you saw. That's not untrue. Any of that is not untrue. But there was more that you didn't see.
It's a whole
Wow.
side to him
Interesting.
that you would never envision.
Yeah.
Even years later, decades later, when I did an interview with George Martin and showed him this EMI schedule that showed that he actually did have access to 4-track when EMI had access to 4-track when he was
Yeah.
saying they only had 2.
Yeah.
And he looked at the schedule and he's looking at the various producers who are doing these sessions on 4-track, and he says, "Oh, Norrie Paramore. Well, he was the golden boy."
The thing is that if you've got an enmity with someone, it often stays, no matter how successful you are, even if you eclipse that other person's popularity and wealth, you've still got that in you. And a few years before he died, when was it? About 2011, maybe 2010. George Martin was the subject of a BBC Two documentary in the Arena Art Strand. Brilliant program. I think it might have even been a 2-parter. Anyway, Giles Martin interviewed his father on camera for that and said, "You've always had a thing about Norrie Paramore, haven't you? Why is it you've always had a thing for about Norrie?" And George Martin still did, even just a few years before he died. And one of the things that Giles Martin said to the director making that film is, "My father has a much steelier or stronger side than anybody realizes. I think this film should bring it out," which was very good of Giles to suggest that. Didn't really succeed in terms of it happening. But yeah, he's always had that. Way back in the early 80s, 87, when I first interviewed Ron Richards, Ron was George Martin's assistant at Parlophone. He said to me that he had read in the New Musical Express George Martin claiming that he'd produced Jerry and the Pacemakers' #1 records, and Ron had done it. I think George may have done one of them, but Ron did the others. And Ron went into George's office and said, "But you said in the paper you're claiming my records." And he said, "Well, it doesn't really matter to you, does it? If I do that, it's okay." And he just kind of stole his achievement.
Wow.
And yeah, he had steel, but he was a lovely guy. I mean, he genuinely, what you saw was not fiction. He was charming and he was erudite and he was gallant and he was a gentleman. But at the same time, look, if you get to the top and you stay there, you've got to have your wits about you, haven't you?
Wow.
And it doesn't detract from his personality that we know these things. It just rounds him out, actually, because otherwise he's almost too good to be true.
Hmm. I just want to ask one thing about Love Me Do. You said that it's totally untrue that Brian Epstein bought many copies so that it
Yeah,
would
uh,
charts.
10,000. Yeah, that's the number always given, 10,000 copies. Yeah. Philip Norman Shout has Brian doesn't know what to do with all these records, and I think it's something about the money it cost him or something like that. I don't know, whatever it was, all based on a fiction because it never happened in the first place. Yeah.
Mm.
And
Huh.
every book's copied that since then.
Yep.
He ordered a lot because it was the finest record store in the north. They had three branches. It was Liverpool. If you were a fan of the Beatles, you wanted to buy it to support them, and the optimum place to buy it was Nems because it was known that they had a connection to the band. So he would have bought a good quantity, but I don't know how many. Um, a key thing that no one ever considered with that is that just because he was a chart shop doesn't mean he had to buy 10,000. First of all, what if even if charts were computed in terms of sales numbers, that would stand out as being a suspicious move. But in those days, charts were compiled very simply. There would be a phone around by the music paper concern, like the New Musical Express or Melody Maker, whichever it was.
Hmm.
They would phone the record shop and say, "Can you give us your top 30 record sales this past week?" Yes, our number one was, our number two was, our number three was. No figures were given, just the ranking of which the best-selling records were. And 30 points would be assigned to number one, 29 points would be assigned to number two, all the way down to 1 point assigned to number 30. And that's how the charts were compiled universally in the UK by all chart providers. No sales numbers were ever considered. So there was no purpose at all in buying a huge quantity for the benefit of fabricating the chart because you could just do it over the phone and say, that's our biggest seller. And that's it. Save yourself the money.
Hmm.
No, it's complete fiction. It was put about by people who were jealous of Brian, who were envious of the fact that this relative newcomer to the group scene in Liverpool suddenly had all the top selling groups and had got them away and into the charts and into huge earning power, which no other Liverpool impresario could do. So naturally there was envy, and naturally they started to sow untruths about Brian because it suited their ends to do so. And they took root, and Brian didn't fight them because you don't want to dignify these things, and he was busy anyway. But the reality was there was no buying, no hype of that record, no hype whatsoever.
Hmm.
Do you want
No,
a footnote about Ardmore and Beechwood?
Sorry,
Do you
what's
want
that?
a footnote about Ardmore and Beechwood?
Do I want a footnote?
Does everyone want a footnote? It was eventually bought by the bassist of that band that they signed, for those two songs.
All right, I've got you now. No, it's Love Me Do was a success because it was really hard earned. But the thing about it was, although it didn't rise any higher than 17, and therefore compared to all those number ones, it looks like a bit of a flop. It was its longevity on the chart. I say this in the film. It was still on the chart 3 months after release, while other records had come up higher and dropped out. It was still hanging in there. And so when Please Please Me came out, they had two records on the chart at the same time. And that was like, wow, who are these people? That in itself was an impact. So, and yeah, there was a documentary about Love Me Do on British television a few years ago that said it dropped out after two. Brian hyped it into the charts. 2 weeks later, it dropped out. It's like, did they not fact check at all?
Mm.
At all. But the answer is no, they don't. Yeah,
all the different charts they had in England, and they had Disc and NME and all of those.
yeah,
Nothing was based on actual sales, but
no,
was sales, but just what the record stores gave them as far as where they ranked with
yeah.
no
They
number.
relied upon the record store's honesty, and obviously the number in the sample would help to smooth out any irregularities. I mean, it only crept into the chart at number 49 in the first weekend, but that was enough to get it noticed. But it wasn't Brian hyping it. As I found when I was writing Tune In, Brian used to provide the chart for Merseybeat newspaper, which was a fortnightly. And there was, I think, a top 20 best-selling records on Merseyside in the past fortnight, as provided by NEMS. Brian did two things. One, he wrote a piece about the fact that chart fabrication was illegal but also immoral, and therefore shouldn't be done. And secondly, given the opportunity in his own chart to put My Bonnie, which was a record they were certainly plugging wherever they could, into that chart in early 62, he didn't. He didn't. He didn't put
Okay.
it in because it didn't obviously merit a space there. But that's how honest he was in terms of chart fabrication. He didn't take the opportunity, which almost everybody else would have done, to put the record they had a vested interest in into his own chart. He didn't do it. Yeah.
Great stuff.
There,
Yeah.
Alan?
there,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Darren.
no,
I think,
just wanted to
yeah.
piggyback off "Love Me Do." Did I understand you correctly that there was a point very early on, around the time that songs were recorded, that "How Do You Do It" was going to be coupled on the single with "Love Me Do"?
Oh, yeah. Well, the Beatles' first 45 would have been How Do You Do It with Love Me Do on the B side.
Right. Okay.
But Ardmore and Beechwood didn't have the publishing on How Do You Do It. And furthermore, Mitch Murray had not yet signed the publisher's assignment, so he was free to, he had more of a say in how it was recorded. And he didn't care for the Beatles recording, thought they were taking the mickey out of it a bit.
Mm.
And because he wasn't yet assigned to a publisher, but that publisher was not going to be Ardmore and Beechwood because Mitch didn't have a relationship with them. Ardmore and Beechwood said, "This is meant to be both sides ours. Remember, we've instigated this." And against his better wishes, George Martin had to drop How Do You Do It?
Which I'm
Um,
sure the Beatles were fine with because
Yeah.
they
well,
didn't like it.
it played beautifully into the story's hands because the Beatles thought that George Martin had dropped it because they'd beseeched him not to release it. They had no idea actually why he did drop it. But when he did drop it, they thought, oh, it's because we asked him not to release it. And they thought, what a wonderful
Okay.
man. He's listened to us. He hadn't listened to them at all. He was
No.
insisting on it being the A side. But there were other parties who said, no, that isn't the way it's going to be.
Mm.
Which is why
Fascinating.
why
Okay.
they had to come down again to have another session. Because once How Do You Do It got dropped, they only had one song in the
It
can.
needed. Yeah.
And then it needed a B side. Which is why George Martin didn't support Love Me Do because it had been what he originally thought was a B side.
A B side, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Great. Okay.
It's an
That cleared that up.
extraordinary story. There is a ledger. There used to be a ledger in the contract department at EMI. I don't know where it is now. Within the details of the Beatles' first agreement on the June 1962 for 6 songs, or 6 sides, they used to call it. And by the end of the release of Love Me Do and P.S. I Love You, they completed the contract. All 6 were done, even though they'd only just got one record out. Because the June the 6th session was counted against the contract. It was not a test. It was already a contracted session.
Okay. Gotcha. Thank
It's
you.
incredibly complicated. You can see why George Martin wanted to draw a line under all of that and start
So,
afresh.
so why did he then have them come and record Please Please Me? Yes.
When? Which
Well, Love
one?
Me Do wasn't a big hit and he wasn't fond of it and they had fulfilled their contract. So why did he have them continue?
Because Love Me Do was a hit. And because he had heard Please Please Me and thought we'll get them back and do that. And he still hoped they'd do How Do You Do It? So
Mm.
there was enough to go forward.
Mm.
They'd made the charts. There was no point in dropping them. I mean, it would have been pointless to drop them. But what he did want to do was wipe the slate clean.
Mhm.
And then in May 63, he gives them a much bigger royalty advance than they need, than their contract merits, and gets into trouble with the management at EMI for giving away the company's money needlessly. And what they basically saw was that he was not a company man. that he was not on the company side, that he was on the side of the artists, and that was already the beginning of the end for George Martin, but that kind of cemented it.
Mhm.
Mm.
It's fascinating stuff.
So complex, but it all makes sense. I mean, it's all quite clear in
Mhm.
my mind now, but it took me a long time to figure it all out.
Yeah.
Right.
All
Mm.
right, Alan, you have some questions?
Yeah, I mean, I had actually always been puzzled about aspects of the that publishing thing and why George Martin didn't insist on releasing How Do You Do It? And I guess I had never put together that Ardmore and Beechwood insisted that both sides be something they publish.
Yeah,
Uh, we also have, you know, the inconsistency of the Lennon McCartney McCartney Lennon
Yeah.
Yeah.
at that time, and I'm sort of curious about the you know how they decided what it was going to be. I had heard, possibly from you, a story of, John walking into a session one day, going up to Paul and saying, "It's Lennon and McCartney, right?" And that's that.
there's no evidence for that. It gets trotted out, but you didn't hear it from me.
No,
No, no
okay,
way, no way would you hear that from me.
Mm.
It's baseless, I think. Mm.
okay. Maybe it was Buskin.
It wouldn't be Richard either. No, I doubt it. I
but
don't think so.
but yeah, but also the question of, whether they were going to include George in the writing group, and how that happened. I mean, would it have been George also signed as a composer, or were they contemplating Lennon, McCartney, Harrison? What do you know about those discussions?
Oh, well, Paul has said a few times, although he didn't say it until about the turn of the century, but he started to say it as far as I remember, that he remembers an occasion when he and John were walking up, funnily enough, round the church where they met in 57, where the Quarrymen had played in 57, Walton Parish Church. Walking up there and talking about it between them, and they pretty much decided just to cut George out, that they would just do the two of them, because after all, they were writing the songs. George wasn't, although he, I'm sure, was chipping in ideas, but not coming up with songs. Um, there was a meeting in the film. I go to 36 Faulkner Street in Liverpool, which was Brian Epstein's clandestine apartment, that he very generously gave to John, or allowed John and Cynthia the use of,
Mhm.
after they got married, because although they were married, they didn't have anywhere to live. They were going to have to go back and live with Mimi. And yeah, it was better that they had their own place. So he had a place in Liverpool that he only used occasionally, and he said to them, "You can use this." And Paul remembers quite categorically that that was where they made the agreement that their songs would always have both names on. No matter who wrote it, it would always have both names. Now, the original assignment for Love Me Do and P.S. I Love You, which gave the publishing to Ardmore and Beechwood, specifies in Brian's handwriting that the credit should be McCartney Lennon. And it ended up being Lennon McCartney. And I can only think that was an error,
Mm.
because the document specifies there wouldn't have been any documents to counteract that, or this one would have been crossed out anyway. It's not crossed out. It's in Brian's writing. The credit should be McCartney Lennon, but it ended up on the 45 Lennon McCartney. So, but the publishing folio, the song sheet, was McCartney Lennon, which was how it should have been on the record.
Mhm.
I think the agreement was, and I've got no proof of this, so I'm only thinking it and not saying it with any certainty, that it must have been that whoever wrote the majority of the song, whoever came up with it, whoever conceived the song, even if it ended up being joint enterprise, would have his name first.
Mm.
So Love Me Do MPS I Love You were both Paul's songs principally, so they were or should have been McCartney Lennon, and they were on the publishing. but not on the record. And then this is where it gets so messy. I can only surmise there's no documentation for this. Please please me and ask me why. Should have been Lennon-McCartney, but possibly to balance up the imbalance of the first record, they were made McCartney-Lennon.
Wow.
And then you've got this seesaw thing that goes all the way up through the autumn of 1963. On many records, the variation, Lennon McCartney, McCartney Lennon, Lennon McCartney, McCartney Lennon. And I include in that the songs they wrote that were covered by other people. There is, I think it's a Billy J. Kramer EP called Billy J. Kramer Hits, which is basically the A and B side of his first two 45s gathered as a four-track EP. And two sides, two tracks of McCartney Lennon and two tracks of Lennon McCartney on the same vinyl,
Hmm.
because that's how they were published and that's how they stayed. But there came a point in around the autumn of 63 when it became Lennon and McCartney and no variation. And I don't think John said to Paul, it's Lennon and McCartney, right? I really don't know the origin of that. I don't think Paul said that.
Hmm.
Or maybe
Did
he
it,
has, but I'm not sure.
did it really matter? Was it a legal thing? Was there any?
No, it had no bearing. It had no
Yeah.
bearing. The other thing I found out when I wrote Tune In, which was a complete revelation to me, was that Brian Epstein didn't only manage the Beatles as a group, he managed Lennon and McCartney as songwriters. So
Okay.
there were twin careers going on here. There's the Beatles and there's Lennon and McCartney as songwriters. And they appointed him as their manager, which has not been in any book at all and never mentioned by anybody at all until I found the contract. I thought, oh my God, I had no knowledge of it. Absolutely no knowledge.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. So George is not party to that agreement, and George was out of the picture for songwriting by then. Except that they didn't, they were encouraging of him, but any songs he wrote were going to be published by George, well, written by George himself and not shared.
Hmm. So how did
Amazingly complicated.
hmm?
It's amazingly complicated.
Yeah. In terms of the show, how did it come about that it's now a DVD? Like, when did they come to you and say, "Can we do this?"
Um, I didn't have the Hornsey Roadshow filmed because it had content in it that would have been impossible to clear.
Hmm.
But when it came to this show, I thought, well, this is worth filming. And so I asked Simon Weitzman and Chris Purcell if they would please film it with no particular aim in mind, but let's have it. And then we can decide what to do with it later. Because if we then afterwards wish we'd filmed it, it's too late. So let's film it and then we'll see. And Simon knows the people at Liverpool West who are based somewhere in the southern US, and a kind of very dedicated Beatles film releasing company.
Mhm.
And they did the Chris O'Dell film and they did Simon's film about fans, and they've done quite a few films.
Hmm.
And they were offered it and they said yes, they would do it. And they had found a budget to go and film in Liverpool and London to top and, give more heft to the material and make up for the fact that not everything that we shot from the stage could be used in the film because of copyright purposes. So it balances it out. It just makes it into more of a film than a stage show,
Right.
which is really all it was in the first place.
Okay.
So yeah, and it was the right thing to do to film it. But when I came to Evolve 63, when I did these shows with five well-known people in the UK talking about Beatles stuff, I knew it would have been difficult to get clearances from all of those people. Not that they would have objected necessarily, but I just didn't even want to bother asking them. So they weren't filmed.
That's a pity.
Yeah, I should have done the same thing really and just filmed them and thought about the rights issues later. But I was so grateful to everyone for agreeing to do it. I didn't want them to feel I was capitalizing on their saying yes,
Hmm.
that I was taking advantage in some way. So they were recorded for audio, but not for film.
Mm.
Yeah.
So how did the idea of doing the location shots come about? Was that you or Chris?
No, I think it was Chris, the director, and Simon and I just felt that since there were quite a few things we couldn't use, that we should make up for it by going out on location. So we did a 2 or 3 days in Liverpool and a couple of days in London. I think a couple of maybe no 2 days in London, yeah. Um, and just went around places, not always with access inside. Quite low budget this film in terms of where we could go. Everything costs money on a film, and we didn't really have it. But we felt that the content was strong enough anyway, and we had the stage show material to use. So I don't think it really matters that I'm standing outside places rather than going in.
Mm.
Very few places look the same inside anyway.
Right.
So
Yeah, but it was it was great if for fanatical collector types who were obsessed about this stuff, being in there where Monty Lister did that first interview was like,
that's a
Yeah.
good one. That one we did get inside. Yeah,
hmm,
yeah, because we went to the hall and to film there, but we were determined. I think Chris, the director, was particularly keen to find where that photograph was taken of the Beatles doing that interview. And so, even though I've been there many times, I've never found that precise spot. But we went into doors through rooms that I've never been in before, right round the back, and there it was.
hmm.
And yeah, and I brought the original tape, and Chris, the director, brought an old Ewer, an old reel-to-reel deck from the 60s, and we played it right there in the room where they had recorded it 60 years earlier, more than.
And it sounded so good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
It's the master tape. It is
Yeah.
the master tape. That is it. That's the one. Yeah.
Also, that apartment that you just
That's
mentioned of Brian's, turning
yeah.
up there and talking to the new owner or renter, who's also a musician. But that was a lot of fun too.
That's just a stroke of luck because I happen to know him personally.
Hmm.
Mm.
Irrespective of the fact that he lives there, he's a young man that I've known since he was a teenager.
Hmm.
He's the son of a good friend of mine. So,
Really
and
Wow.
he just happens to have moved into that flat.
Wow.
funny.
Yeah.
And it just happened to, it's like the coincidence is like
Yeah.
incredible.
Hmm.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
You see a lot of that around the Beatles, and especially in Mark's
Uh,
books and other things,
Yeah.
is like
yeah.
George Martin happened to be in Hamburg taking a course.
And
So
what about
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
place that Paul and his first girlfriend stay in London?
In London. Yes.
That
Yeah.
ends up being where the Ashers
Yeah, correct. That's a ridiculous coincidence. Absolutely
Yeah.
ridiculous, but true. Yeah, yeah. It's not, no, Celia wasn't Paul's first girlfriend. I think he'd had a few by 1962.
Oh, okay.
I'm shocked.
Yeah, yeah.
were there places that you wanted to go that you couldn't get into, or were problematic somehow?
No, not really. Not really. No, no. I mean, we filmed outside Abbey Road because it would have just been we wouldn't have got in. Um, you have to jump through so many hoops to get the approvals process on that, and we just couldn't be bothered. But it didn't matter. It really didn't matter. But otherwise, no, I don't think so. I think we were okay. Doing my Eric Idle impression from the Ruttles, on this very spot right here, just a few feet back there. Mm.
Right.
Were there any instances where you approached people about visiting a site and they weren't aware of its role in history, or was everyone pretty much aware of what
Uh,
had happened in this
I
place,
don't
this
know.
building?
I think possibly one of them might have been when we went to a place called Birkenhead across the water from Liverpool, to the shop where the Beatles had got their first suits. Ben
Okay.
O'Dorn, master tailor of Grange
Oh,
Road, West Birkenhead. It's no longer a tailoring establishment. But we filmed outside there, and I could see people giving us looks about what you're doing here. Why are you filming outside this little side street shop in Birkenhead? But yeah, apart from that, no. I mean, it's quite a well-worn path now, the Beatles,
Yeah.
Liverpool and London as well.
Okay.
Mm.
That was another interesting aspect of actually both the book and the show, the whole question of the suits, because for so many years, there's been myths about, uh, John saying that, Brian made us wear suits, and
Yeah,
Paul saying, I don't remember him objecting that much, but
Yeah.
that's
you
right.
know, you got to you give a lot of detail about that in the film.
Including quoting, I don't know if it's in the film, but it was on the stage and it's in the book that there are also Lennon quotes in which he talks quite candidly about the fact that the suits were our idea and they make complete sense. So it depended on what kind of a mood he was in, whether he was ranting or not, I think, on a given day, uh, as to what he said.
Hmm.
The grand mistake that all Beatles books have made and commentators have made in pushing this line that Brian Epstein made the Beatles wear suits is that you could not push the Beatles into doing anything they didn't want to do. They were far too strong-headed for that and far too opinionated for that. And if they didn't see the sense in doing something, they would simply not do it. And Brian realized quite early on, he was savvy enough to realize, probably from bitter experience once or twice, that if you try and tell them what to do, they won't do it. But what you have to do is had to do was explain to them why there was something was sensible, and then they would look at it and go, "Okay, we'll do that then." And what he did with the suits was suggest to them that if they wore suits, they would have a lot more advantages and disadvantages of not wearing them. They could get better bookings, they could get more money, they could get a recording contract, they could get on television, they could get on radio. They would generally be better received by people if they wore smarter clothes. He didn't force them into suits, but he presented the idea and they accepted the idea and agreed to do it and went over to Birkenhead and had a hand in the design of these suits.
Hmm.
Mhm.
So any author, any commentator who tells you Brian forced them into suits simply doesn't understand the Beatles' mentality, which is fundamental to the understanding of who they were.
Well,
If you
and
do,
actually, one of the pictures that you show, the early ones of them when they first had the suits, I've seen that picture in other books, and they have kind of these, particularly Paul has this really grouchy look on his face, and they'll point to that and say, "See, that's how much they hated these suits."
yeah, no, I mean the collarless jackets that they wore in '63 was their idea and not Brian's.
Hmm.
So all sorts of people who want to beat Brian up, which has always been the case, uh, envy and the rest of it that he always got subjected to, is always, he presented them as pretty boys and they did this. It was their idea. It's as simple as that. It's fundamental to the understanding that these people were much stronger headed than these commentators like to suggest, that they could be manipulated by their manager. No way could you manipulate Paul McCartney or John Lennon or George Harrison. And when they got him, Ringo as well. I can't speak for Pete, but certainly for the others, you couldn't. But tell them give them an idea of what could be done, and they'll see the sense of it. And that's what he did.
I mean, in
Mm.
this case, the problem is that the root of the myth is John, you know.
Yeah, yeah,
And we sort of for many years took everything John said, especially in those long post Beatles interviews,
you're absolutely
as
right. Yeah,
gospel.
Hmm.
yeah, you're right about that. Yeah, you're right. And quite a few things were wrong from that, the Wenner interview in particular,
Hmm.
the Rolling
Yeah.
Stone interview. Yeah, yeah. There's something
Yeah.
else I was going to say pertinent to all of that. Oh, when the Beatles they played in Manchester on February the 2nd, 1962, they wore their leather suits. Incidentally, they when they wore all the leathers, they themselves called them suits. They used to call it our leather suits. So they were still in suits, just leather and not
And
fabric.
leather.
Hmm.
Hmm.
But when they went to Manchester, it was okay in Liverpool because people had known them for a little while now, through all of '61 into '62. But when they went to Manchester, where they were completely unknown, and they turned up in these leather suits, everybody laughed. Well, they didn't want to be a laughing stock. Paul says that in the Merseysound interview in August '63, the BBC documentary. The people were laughing. We didn't want to be a laughing stock, so they wanted to get out of the leather as well. They weren't. They didn't have to be coerced. So
It's funny
yeah.
because, by the time John said that, um, leather seemed, so much cooler than suit, not in terms of temperature, but
Yeah.
cooler to wear than suits. And it's surprising that they'd have been laughed at. I would have thought they'd have been seen as like, hey, there's these guys turned up in leather. It's really cool. But and obviously that was fine in Hamburg.
Yeah, in Hamburg, it's hard to tell exactly what they were wearing. I think they kind of wore anything in Hamburg. I mean, they didn't just wear the leather. The true all leather look is the classic Dick Matthews pictures from kind of November '61. Brian, I mean, here's another thing. The first ever photo session that Brian Epstein organized for the Beatles. He organized the photographer, the date of it, the place of it, got the Beatles there, was present himself when it was happening. They were in their leathers. He organized that photo session in which they're wearing the leathers and used those pictures to promote them for the first 2 or 3 months. These are the Albert Marion pictures from December '61. He wasn't against the leather. He just realized it was going to inhibit their progress.
Mhm.
And once he told them it will inhibit your progress, they agreed to change.
Actually, in Hamburg in '60, they had those sort of light purple suits, didn't they, when they first got there?
Yeah, made by Paul's next door neighbor, Mr. Richards. Lilac color they were.
Lilac, yes.
Wow.
So there's the black and white pictures of them at the Indra Club. They've been colorized, not difficult to do these days, lilac, and boy, do they look a sight. Yeah.
You also said that the Beatles designed those early suits
Yes,
themselves.
they did. They did because I spoke to the tailor who fitted them out for it, and they kept coming back saying that how narrow they wanted the lapels, how narrow they wanted the trouser leg. They were kind of smart Italian design. They were not just a garish suit. They even then they look stylish.
Were they doing it individually? Like somebody might have wanted a collar a certain way, or were they keeping it uniform,
Uniform,
all
uniform,
four? Okay.
uniform, which goes, I mean, every group wore the same clothes in those days, but it goes back to Paul McCartney being at a Butlins holiday camp in about 1954 when he was 12. There was a group entertaining the campers there for a few days or a week, perhaps. I think they were called the Five Smith Brothers. And Paul saw them at the camp walk past, and they all wore matching clothes. And he thought, what a great look that was. And he knew that what if he was, well, he didn't think then about it, but when he was in a group, he remembered that and thought
Okay.
we'd always wear matching. When he's just joined the Quarrymen, and there's that picture taken of them in late 1957 of John and Paul together at the front. They're wearing the same clothes, which means they thought about it. They didn't just turn up and find they were wearing the same clothes. They've decided that. They've gone
Okay.
out and made a purchase.
Mhm.
Similarly, when they auditioned for Larry Parnes, they're all wearing the same things.
See, I've told Alan and Ken and Kit, I don't know how it would work with Kip, that we should all wear the same thing when we do
Uh,
the podcast here. They
Yeah,
always say, nah.
Could work. It could work.
yeah.
I'd go for it.
We
Yeah,
should
we
just
can't
wear
really
whatever
see.
Kit
We can
wears.
only see your head, Ken. We can't really see anything more. You could be
Yeah,
naked, and we just wouldn't know.
there you go.
Hmm.
This is true.
So I should pass
No.
you over to Kit for further questioning.
All right. Well, my gosh, I first of all,
Mm.
I love the film. I think it was a great idea to not only show, of course, that you lecturing, but those trips you took to stand, whether you were in front of or inside the buildings, I think really brought a new dimension
Yeah.
to the story. And one of the
Yes.
moments,
Thank you.
oh yeah, I mean it was brilliant.
Yeah.
And one of
Yeah.
the moments that really struck me was when you stood in front of the Irby Village Hall Whirl in
Oh
September
yeah.
1960. I mean, it was the
Yes.
small out of nowhere, and you said 5 months later they had a #1 hit.
Yes. And 2.5 years later they're playing Shea Stadium.
Yeah, I mean,
Two and a half-
that was
Yeah,
one of the moments that you
yeah,
just thought, wow.
Less than
I
3 years later. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I know. I know. Just a little suburban village hall,
Mhm.
um, of the kind that, well, in fact, I tell the story in the film of how there had been a cake sale there in order to raise sufficient funds to pay the Beatles' fee for that engagement.
Mhm.
Yeah, which is quite beautiful, really.
Yeah, it was a sweet story.
Yeah,
It really
sweet
is.
cake as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sweet cake.
Yeah.
That's right. I bet it was great. Um, also, going back for a minute, I know you've talked about this a bit already. To the place where the Beatles did their first interview. What
Yeah.
was it? What was it like? I mean, this was one of my favorite moments of the film, not just for informational purposes, but the look on your face when you were playing this tape and standing right where they were had stood.
Yeah.
What was that moment like for you?
It was very nice because I feel like I've had an attachment to that tape anyway because I first heard it in the early 1980s and found the man who made the tape, Monty Lister. He's not in that. There's that photograph, and we show the photograph because we're in that very same space. But in fact, he's not in the picture. So I've got a picture of him in the film just so that we could see him. He ducked out of the picture and left it to two boys who were present. Um, but I first went to that hall with him, with Monty, in about 1985, and we didn't look for it for some reason. Um, we just went into the hall. And I've been there many times. In fact, this past August, I saw some bands, Beatles bands, playing in there. So it was
Wow.
not like seeing the Beatles, but it was in the ballpark. But to go into the room with the tape was obviously a ridiculously unlikely thing to do, but a lovely thing to do, and it made complete sense to hear it there. You know, it just
Hmm.
from that point on in October 62, they never looked back. But at that time, they're still introducing themselves because nobody really knows who they are.
That's what I was going to say. That's the
Yeah.
other thing that really strikes you when you listen to that. I mean, John Lennon, who normally, of course, would come on, making jokes and coming off pretty cocky. It's like, oh, I play the harmonica and I play the guitar. I mean,
Yeah,
it just sounds
yeah,
so different.
Yeah.
yeah.
It sounds so young.
Yeah. And
And
Monty
also
List.
Paul saying John is the leader of the band. That was
Yes.
the
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Volunteering it too. It doesn't even have to say. He just volunteers it. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's because George says he plays lead guitar.
Mhm.
Monty says, "Does that mean that you're the leader of the group?" And George says, "No, no." And Paul says, "John is in fact the leader of the group." So, okay. Yeah, but that
Interesting.
was, and they'd agreed that they would say that. They didn't say it for much longer, but to have it on tape is great. Yeah.
Right.
And
Oh,
you actually released that interview, right? In the
Yeah.
Beatles Live. There was a
Yeah.
flexi disc
Yeah.
that you put
That's
in
right.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I'd got the Beatles fan club records in the late 1960s, December. This disc would arrive in the mail, this floppy disk, this flexi record. And I had an affinity for Beatles flexi records. So I
Hmm,
went to the place where the fan club had their flexis pressed and had mine pressed at the same factory. Yeah.
nice.
That's great.
Yeah.
You should get that book reissued.
yes.
Since you're not doing stage shows and you still need to earn some money while you're writing, you should get that book reissued with the flexi disc because there's
Yeah.
always people looking for it. You
Yeah.
go to Fest, you run into dozens of people looking for that book. So you should do
It's
that.
hard to find. No, I least said really. I'm not proud of that book, even though it was good in its time. But I mean, it was better that all the information within it got folded into the Chronicle. And
Right.
that's always my go-to, not the live book. Um, it's 40 years old this May.
Mm.
40 years since
Wow.
it came out. It's ridiculous. Yeah,
Well, that's
Uh, You
and
said
I'm only
you're not
27.
you're not fond of the book, you said?
I'm not fond of that live book. I'm not fond of the recording sessions book. I'm not fond of the chronology book I did.
Right.
I mean, is this would you say this is a case where you're looking back at some of your early works and thinking, I should have, I could have, I didn't, I should
Yeah,
have, why didn't
yeah,
I? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
yeah,
don't listen
yeah,
to you.
yeah,
Hey,
Listen to the
Listen to
fans.
us.
the
yeah.
recording sessions inspired me to do what I'm doing, so I love that book.
Thank you. I mean,
Really.
it's lovely to hear that, and I've heard that from different people down the years in different disciplines, and it's always a pleasure to hear. But I can't look at it. But the Chronicle is that's okay. Um, I've said this before, but in other interviews, but all the recording sessions in the Beatles 60s are being written by me in my trilogy in a new way. And eventually, this might be after I've gone, but eventually that information could be extracted into a whole book just about the Beatles recording sessions that will be much, much more what I want to say. Because the level of information about what happened and what they sounded like is now greater than ever, especially with all the separations that, of mix, that people are doing, Lord Reith and all that lot, all the incredible separations of Beatles audio recordings that just open your ears to really what was going on in those sessions, which even if you heard, as I did, the multi-track tapes, you couldn't hear them the way that you can hear them now.
Yeah.
Mm.
True.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
and all of that is a steep learning curve. If you're describing, as I am, the artistry of what they did, then there it is now, clearer than ever. Yeah.
Exactly.
But where the Beatles live is concerned, where else can you find a list of all the songs that the Beatles perform live? Even some of them they might have done a few times. There's a lot of songs in there that we never heard them do, and
Yeah.
you have proof of that of certain songs. There's a lot of great song titles in there.
Well, they're
Songs
in the
that-
Chronicle as well.
yeah, but
Um, yeah, I always felt that list could be improved, and I hope that in my working time with Paul many years ago that that would happen, but it never did. I did give a copy when briefly I was getting on with George Harrison. I did give a copy of the live book to him and pointed to those sections and asked him, because there's quite a lot of question marks over who sang lead vocal and that kind of thing, or whose version had inspired them. Asked him to make notes in it and give it back to me so that I would get his take on it. And the next thing I heard, I think from Brian Roylance, George says he's written in, he's made notes in your book of improvements and clarifications of those songs, but he's not giving it back to you. He's giving it to Paul for him to add his. Well, I never got it. I never got it. So I did have someone at MPL go and look in Paul's personal bookcase to see if my book was there, and possibly to steal it for me. But it never. She couldn't find it, so I never did get that book back with George's notes in it, which I'd love to have done. And it would have helped our understanding of things. That's the main point.
Absolutely. That talking about when you said about talking to Paul, that was another part of the presentation that I really loved, those clips of interviews that you had done with
Yeah.
Paul. He sounded so like unguarded, and
Yes.
I mean, he just sounded, not as rehearsed, shall we say, as
Yeah.
some of the other interviews we've heard of him since. He just seemed
Yeah.
more candid.
I think so. He was always pretty relaxed when I was interviewing him, but mostly because it wasn't for a newspaper or
Yeah.
just respect to Alan with the New York Times, brilliant interviews with all the leading players. Because it all comes down to, and Alan will attest to this, the questions that you ask. If you keep off the beaten track and ask them good stuff, they'll answer properly. I'm not sure how true that is now that they're in their 80s. But certainly when they were in their 40s and 50s, you could get fantastic answers from them if you asked the right questions. And I did an interview with Paul about pseudonyms that he'd used, Paul Ramon and all of that lot. And he volunteered something I'd never heard of, which was that in 1962 he considered changing his name to Paul James.
Yeah. That was a shocker.
That was huge.
yeah.
He still barely mentions that. Again, partly because nobody asks him, Nobody invites the answer that will, that would enlighten us. But he said it in 91, and I used it in the show, and it's in the film as well. You hear Paul talking about, I nearly was Paul James instead of Paul McCartney. Yeah. Extraordinary, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
The other thing that surprised me, you didn't have time to go into it in depth, at least in the film, was about Ringo when he was with Rory Storm and the Hurricanes, how he couldn't wait to get out of there, to
Yeah.
get out of that band. And I didn't realize, I mean, of course, I knew he was excited to join the Beatles, but I didn't realize he was that unhappy with
Yeah, he'd
Yeah,
quit. He'd
yeah.
quit them once before. Before he
Mhm.
joined the Beatles, he'd already quit and gone for a few months before he went back and quit again. So it was just he was almost a free agent by that point, but there was the promise of a summer season at Butlins, which was steady work and steady supply of females. So quite an attractive mix. Mm, mm.
there you go.
Isn't it true?
Absolutely.
I could have sworn I heard you say, Mark, in another podcast that George had a disdain for people who tried to pass themselves off as Beatle experts.
Yeah, or yeah, basically yes.
Yeah, you've mentioned that before.
So
Yeah.
it's great to know that he was cooperating with you
Mhm.
on these songs.
It was good to begin with. The very before I met George the first time, he was reluctant to meet me because I was this big Beatle expert.
Uh-huh.
Um, but he asked a few people, and they said that Mark's okay. So, and I was interviewing him for a British newspaper, and I think his record company hoped he would do it because it would be good exposure for Cloud9. So he met me, and he was a little bit snippy, but basically fine. We got on fine the first time we met. We got on better the second time we met, and after that, it was fine until I started working for Paul.
Ah,
At which point, it wasn't so fine.
mhm,
He wasn't so fine.
mhm. Yeah, well, and there does
Wow.
seem to be this
I
feeling of, that with a lot of that, I was there, you weren't. I know.
The
I know what
last
happened.
the last one-to-one time that I had with George Harrison was in 1998 when Apple Corps were trying to finally wrest ownership of the Beatles' Hamburg tapes, the Star Club tapes. They'd been released for 20 years by that point. It wasn't a case of preventing people hearing them because they'd been out for 20 years. It was a case of proving ownership of them so that these endless re-releases would stop and so that if they wanted to do something with it themselves, they could do that. So I was called in as an expert witness to help gather the case on Apple's behalf. And during the course of all of that, it was made clear that George would be in court giving evidence as well as me. I was an expert witness for Apple, and they were calling another one, which was George Harrison. I think there was a realization born from experience that if a Beatle gets up in court and goes into the witness box, they almost always win.
Sure.
Because as Alan Klein said in 1971, judges get Beatlemania.
Hmm.
And George did indeed get up in court. I was there in the court as well when he got up. And because he was in the witness box talking about the Beatles in Hamburg, I considered it important enough for me to make notes of what he was saying. And I could see him watching me from the witness box, making notes. And
Uh-oh.
I kept catching him looking at me. And when he finished his stint in the witness box and went back and sat down next to their lawyer, he was whispering something to the lawyer and then looking up at me and whispering something, and they're both looking up at me. And I'm on their side.
Yeah.
I'm not just in the court by chance. I'm there to give evidence in the hope that they win the case. And later that day, I did give evidence. But he was diminishing me right in front of me for wanting to get things right. And he kept saying, "This is all trivia. This is all trivia. It's not important. Why does anybody want to write this down? This is just all trivia." Those were his very words. And
Wow.
so even though I was there ostensibly with him to help him and his company win a case, he was belittling me. And that's just how he was with experts.
Wow.
Olivia's
I
the
mean,
same way, you know. I mean, she's
pardon?
inherited that from him. Olivia is too. I
Yes.
mean, when they did the Romanian angel appeal thing, I interviewed her because it was her project.
Yeah.
And she said, "Yeah, you know, they're recording this song for the EP that they used to do in the Beatle days, but they never recorded, and it's Nobody's Child." And I said, "Well, actually, they did record it, sort of, with Tony Sheridan singing, and it came out." And she said, "You're not a Beatles expert, are you?" And you could hear dripping
Yeah.
from that Beatles expert was like a gallon of venom. I mean, it was, oh,
Yeah.
no, 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 I just have
No,
to
no,
write.
not at all. Who?
Hate them. Hate them.
Who?
I'm an AC/DC guy.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, they were. The
nothing
Bay City
personal.
Rollers have them beat.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Oh, that's right. So just one more
Wow.
question that kind of I
Yeah.
think it sums up with a lot of what we've been saying. One of the main I think I mean so many great points about this documentary is the myth busting that I mean, we talked about the clothes
Yeah.
and that kind of thing. What are just a couple of other myths that you think still persist that just will not die?
About 1962, you mean?
Yeah. Hmm.
Well, Decca didn't turn them down.
Hmm.
George Martin didn't want to sign them. They were signed before he met them. I mean, we've covered these, but they're
Hmm.
all pretty big. Brian didn't hype Love Me Do into the charts.
Hmm.
Um, Pete, why did they get rid of Pete? I mean, I look at that
Yeah.
quite thoroughly. I mean, that's been hanging around for 63 and a half years now. And there are still people who think there's more to it than meets the eye when there isn't.
Hmm.
Um, and what I do say in the film is the reason that the rumors were allowed to take hold as to why the Beatles had dismissed him was because the Beatles did him the favor of not talking about it.
Yeah.
They didn't badmouth him publicly. They didn't say we got rid of him because he wasn't good enough.
Mhm.
Had they done so, it might have injured his chances of getting on. So they very politely didn't say anything. But that left a vacuum. And into that vacuum tumbled all these rumors, and they still jumble around, even since Tune In. I mean, that film Midas Man, that awful film Midas Man that came out a year or so ago, it was
Yeah.
as if Tune In didn't exist. You
Mhm.
know, it's all the old stuff about George Martin saying, "I'll give your boys a chance," and why are they sacking Pete and all that? It's like we know,
Mhm.
but there it is still.
Yep.
You know,
Absolutely. Yeah, that story about Pete or Paul being threatened by Pete. I mean, I've heard that over and over. And I'm like, that just doesn't sound
it doesn't sound right.
right.
It doesn't sound right. But they make their own rumors as well because when I was writing Tune In, I found out exactly who it was who gave George the black eye in the cavern.
Mm.
Um, And it was nothing to do with them getting rid of Pete and getting Ringo, but George and Ringo, thought that it was. So Ringo says, I think in the anthology, George took a black eye for me, and
Uh-huh.
and loves that detail. And George thinks that that was why, but that wasn't why he got a black eye. But it's good enough for them, and that's all that matters, really. But actually, it isn't the way it happened.
So why did he get a
That's so
black eye?
funny. Yeah.
Because there was this guy, this hard nut in the cavern, hard nut being an old English phrase for someone who was handy with his fists and
Oh.
liked using them. I think George got what they call a Liverpool kiss, which was a headbutt.
Oh.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
but George could be a bit testy with audiences if he was unhappy with things that were being said from the studio, from the floor.
Mm.
Um, and in the anthology, he says it was all about Pete, but it doesn't seem that it was. But the guy who actually did hit him is dead,
Mm.
which is why I mention his name. I don't think he'll have done it. I value the sanctity of my eyes.
Mhm.
Mm.
Right.
He'd be quite a geezer now, though. I mean,
Oh yeah, yeah, but some of these guys, yeah. I mean, it's been forgotten now, but in those days in Liverpool, it was a really rough place.
Yeah.
I mean, you can walk there fairly unhindered these days, but in those days, you could get beaten up for no reason whatsoever. And a lot of the places where the Beatles played, there would be people looking to beat them up afterwards. And they
Wow.
had to learn how to defend themselves. And but there was an occasion when Stewart got caught and got kicked, and that's probably what brought on his brain hemorrhage.
Right.
Sure.
Yeah.
Mm.
Mm.
One of the things I bring up in the film is that Stewart died in 1962.
Yeah.
And he's something of a footnote in the Beatles story, but he wasn't a footnote to them.
Mhm.
And 62, their breakthrough year, is they've only just lost him. And when they have their first number one, which is February 63, he's only been dead 10 months.
Wow.
You know, this is pretty fresh for them. To us, he's just this person who left and died and they carried on. But for them, but particularly for John and George as well, oh, but all of them, it was a shocking thing. They didn't quickly forget it. They
Mhm.
just moved on, but it was there not far back.
Mhm.
And I
Do you
wanted to
know if
bring that out. Hmm.
do you know if they kept in contact with Stu after he left?
Oh, sure. Yeah, well, he came to Liverpool not long before he died, and he saw them. Yeah,
Mm.
and I mean, they were going to see him when they went over there in April '62. They were expecting him to meet them at the airport, but instead it was Astrid with news that he had died.
Or-
Jeez.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
Do
yeah.
you happen to know? I mean, I've interviewed David Bedford a number of times, and I sure wish I can get the two of you together on the same show because, you don't agree on certain things, but um, how good a bass player really was Stu? Because according to David, even after he left the Beatles, he was given offers from other bands.
He played in another band. He played in a band. What were they called? The Eyes. It's in Tune In. They played in a
Yeah.
Hamburg group for a few weeks. Yeah, sat in with them. And there are no pictures of that, unfortunately, but he did play with another group. I wasn't there, and I wouldn't be the best judge of whether how skilled he was anyway, but Klaus was there and became a top bass player. And he says Stuart wasn't always a beginner. He was a beginner at the beginning, but he wasn't a beginner later. He may not have been the best bass player in the world. I'm sure he wasn't, but he'd learned he'd learned enough. But
Interesting.
perhaps he wasn't as good as, he could have been had he been a natural bassist.
Hmm.
What is a natural bassist? I mean, Paul wasn't a natural bassist either. He was just a naturally brilliant musician, but not a natural bassist to begin with. He didn't really want to be bass guitarist.
Yep.
Kind of got forced into it when Stuart left.
He was lumbered with it.
Lumbered with it.
Absolutely.
I think those were his words, weren't they? Got lumbered with it.
Ha.
Yeah,
Well, he sure made the most of it.
he sure did.
Yes.
Well, that's just, how brilliant he is. How
Well,
how brilliant were the Beatles to have all these people and to have Brian Epstein and George Martin. At the end of Evolver 62, the film, my last item is a full page advertisement that Brian took out in Merseybeat newspaper in December 62 about what the Beatles had achieved in the year of 1962. And at the bottom of it is a list of the people who are supporting the Beatles now. And there's him as their manager. There's George Martin as their recording manager, as they called it, producer.
Hmm.
There's a publicist who was Tony Barrow. There's a fan club secretary, Roberta Brown, Bobby Brown. There's Neil Aspinall as their full-time road manager. And just too late for the advertisement, but on board by the time it's published is a publisher, Dick James. 6 people behind the Beatles. A year earlier, there'd only been Bobby and Neil, the fan club and the roadie. But
hmm.
now there's a publicist, a publisher, a recording manager, and an artist manager. And the Beatles have got the talent and they've got the ability, but their breaks come from this team of people who will pave the way for them. It's an extraordinary story.
Really is.
And they're all giving of their best because they all believe in the Beatles. They all love the Beatles, you know. Brian wasn't just their manager; he loved them
Hmm.
and managed them as with their best interest at heart always. How lucky was that? But it's them. They engendered that and found the right person to fulfill that role. It drives me mad when people slag off Brian Epstein because they don't know what they're talking about.
Yep. Yep.
They don't have full command of the facts behind the opinion that they're spouting.
Can
You
I
mentioned
clear
about
up?
not being able to make them do anything and how headstrong they all were. And there's one
Yeah.
story in the film, and it's in the book too, um, uh, about them going around to different publications to try and
Yeah.
promote Love Me Do.
Yeah.
And you basically get at a story that sort of ties into at least Paul's, and it probably was all of them, their lifelong dislike of Robert Stigwood, who turns up later in the story again. Brian takes him on as a semi-partner or something for a
Yeah, he
while,
does. Yeah, he does.
and then he wants to take them over, and they say there's no way. But it
Yes.
all goes back to that one story in your.
Yeah, that's right. You've got it. You've got it. They never forgot. Anyone who slighted them, who didn't give them due respect, they always remembered who that was. And they would, because they became so big, there would typically be a time when they could use that against them. And Stigwood was hoping to, be the Beatles manager from '67, and they basically remembered that he hadn't been interested in them at all.
Mm.
So,
Hmm.
But
and
there's
held it
also
against him.
the story of them like on their way out. They're sort of
Yeah.
cheesed off with the interviewer who's being condescending, and they
Yes.
sort of knock over this statue.
Oh
Pass the
yeah.
cast bust. Yeah. Yeah. It's a symbolic moment of the old ways breaking and the new is coming in through the door. It is incredibly symbolic that that happens, but it actually did happen as well, in literally as well as metaphorically. Yeah. Yeah. But then they go on to the only place in London that gives them any kind of breathing space that day is a little publication for basically for ballrooms and dancers called Dance News that had a record column. And the guy interviews them, and I show it in the film, and he understands who they are and what makes them different straight away. There were receptive people around. There were people who didn't understand them and didn't get them until they had their eyes opened. But there were people who were receptive, and this guy, uh, straight away, Derek Runciman was his name. And there's the quote that John gives them, which I highlight in the film. They're there to promote Love Me Do. It's been out 4 days. It's their new record, and they're there for that purpose to promote it. And John says, "Oh, we're not so fond of it now, but our next one is the one that we think is
Yeah.
going to be much
Yeah.
much better." And there, in a nutshell, is the Beatles' attitude.
Yep.
Why they're going to be so progressive in all the years to come. Why they're never going to stop and look back. Why they will always move forward fast and keep ahead of the pack. Right there in their very first quote in a London newspaper. It's extraordinary.
Did
Wow.
they actually know what the next single was going to be 4 days after the release?
Yeah, because they'd done the early version of Please Please Me and it hadn't been released. It got issued on Anthology, but hadn't. They knew they were going to go back and have another go at it.
Mm.
Mm.
It's also extraordinary, the whole story with How Do You Do It? The mere fact that the Beatles were pushing to get their own songs to be the A-side. And this is after they'd been turned down by every record company. Like,
Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, like I said, they were never short of an opinion. But um, but despite John's best pleas, um, George Martin was pressing ahead with How Do You Do It until other forces derailed that. There's an interesting thing which I learned too late for Tune In and still has a mystery about it, which is that they were actually, the How Do You Do It was one of two songs that they were sent to learn. And I don't know what the second one was, and no one ever said it. And I have no clue as to what song it was. But there's a letter from George to Astrid in which he says that they've been sent 2 songs by London and we've got to learn them, plural.
Uh-huh.
Wow.
And How Do You Do It is one of them. How Do You Do, as they thought it was called.
Right.
But I don't know what the second one was. And no
Is there
one's ever
anyone left
referred.
alive that you can ask?
No, no,
Mm.
no. It's a complete mystery. It
Wow.
wasn't another Mitch Murray song.
Mhm.
There's no indication. No one ever mentioned it apart from George mentioning it in that letter. And I think I've seen a document where Brian says 2 songs as well. So I believe it to be true, but I don't know anything about the second number. And they didn't do it. They only did do How Do You Do It?
Right.
But they must have learned a second song.
Hmm.
Paul's talked about How Do You Do It often, but never mentioned a second song. Maybe they jettisoned it quite quickly. I just don't know. Mm.
Okay. Could we just, I'd like to clear up the whole issue about the June 6th session
Yeah.
because when Tune In, when the book came out, you had said that by June 6th, that you already had a contract. So this was not um, a tryout. It was
No.
not an audition. This was their first session.
Yes.
So again,
Unlikely as it may seem, yes.
Hmm.
what's that? Okay, this is what because I interviewed David Bedford a few months ago when his new book came out, and I actually put I typed out here exactly what he said to me about this. He said, first of all, June 6th was an audition. They weren't signed. I consulted the former senior lawyer in Liverpool. For a contract to exist, you need an offer, you need an acceptance, you need a consideration, which is who's going to do what, and you need an intention to create a legal relation. So George Martin had a contract sent to Brian unsigned. Brian signed his half of it and sent it back to EMI. That contract was not signed by EMI until June 18th. And that evidence is in your book, The Beatles Chronicles, where he has a copy of the letter where the secretary returned it to George Martin saying it's now been signed. So the contract wasn't signed until June 18th. Plus, everybody who was there on the day of June 6th said it was an audition. Um, so there was no intention for Parlophone from the engineers, from George Martin, from anybody to consider them under a contract. It didn't exist at the time. It had been signed by Brian, but that wasn't a legally binding contract. Your response?
That's simply not true. That's simply not true. Undoubtedly, I mean, I've seen the EMI paperwork, including more than I put in the Chronicle. They were undoubtedly under contract. The first 4 songs that went down on the tape that is now, in the Emmerich estate somewhere, they're against the contract because the contract was already in force. Before every session at EMI, there used to be what was called a red form. And the red form would stipulate the studio, 1, 2, or 3, the time of the session, the artist manager who would be present, the artist, and maybe the songs that would be recorded, and it would be signed off by another member of staff, countersigned, as it were. If artist tests had a very particular form, I've seen many of them. This was
Mm.
not the Beatles form for June 6 is not that form. There's artist test. What's the other one? Not recording test. There's an artist test and something else. I'm forgetting the terminology now, but there is another kind of test, a commercial test. Commercial test. Again, any commercial test session would say commercial test right along the top of the red form. This one doesn't say that. This one has it was typed before the session. The contract information is already on there. It's already on there. They were paid musicians' union fees, and it goes on the ledger as the first 4 songs against the 6 songs that they're obliged to record in the first 12 months. It is undoubtedly a signed act. Senior lawyer in Liverpool, he's talking about David Harris. I knew David Harris.
Mm-hmm.
He wouldn't have had anything to do with this. This was not. David Harris drafted contracts for Brian to issue, but he didn't He wouldn't have been party to that particular agreement. Brian signed it, and it was countersigned by, or witnessed, I should say, by Bob Wooler. That was the end of it. They're undoubtedly signed. There is it's absolutely unequivocal that they're signed. The ledgers and the documents are from the moment, and that's it.
I mean, also just
Whether every
logically, if if Martin was being basically forced to record them, there wouldn't have been any need for an audition because whether or not he thought they passed the audition, he still had to record them. So,
That's why they were signed. I mean, because I remember when I was writing the Chronicle, I'd got some paperwork from EMI in about 91. And I was working with George Martin and I laid it all out in front of him. And I said, George, I don't understand this. Why are they getting a contract in May when you haven't even met them yet? And he indicated that he couldn't understand it either. I've generously said I think he'd willed it out of his mind, actually, the true circumstances. But I think actually I'd probably just presented a truth to him that he didn't want to accept. It was contrary to every story he had ever told. Since he was obliged to sign them, as you say, why would there be a test? There will be, I mean, it would be pointless.
Mhm.
The difficulty that Brian Epstein had in ending the contract that he had with Pete in August of 62 owed to the fact that though the contract under which he had signed Pete was flawed anyway by Brian because he didn't have the parents sign it as one thing. The problem was that the Parlophone contract had come through the first contract, and therefore there was an obligation there. So undoubtedly, despite David Bedford's interpretation, I'm afraid he's wrong, and the way I've said it is right. I mean, I think it might be an example of him trying to find pieces that fit and work out a story of how come this fits, and he's got these pieces that don't quite fit together, but he's trying to force it. The natural picture is that they were signed. Why else would George Martin even offer them a contract in the first place? I mean, he had turned them down in February. What is he doing with them in June if he didn't like them?
Right.
If he
Mhm.
wasn't obliged to do something with them. As weird as it is, it's the truth. Mm.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay. I just
Interesting.
wanted your response to that because that's what he told me a few months ago. So,
Yeah.
Mark, so everyone watching until this point is saying, when are these guys going to ask you what the state of the remaining two books is? Especially, now we've seen on Amazon had that, erroneous thing about how they were both coming out in 2028 or something.
Right.
So what's the state of things?
Um, I'm writing at the moment. I'm writing now. I've been writing a while. It's a huge job, an absolutely huge job. I can't begin to, I mean, no book on the Beatles has ever been this comprehensive or ambitious. Um, it is possible when you're writing books to turn them out quicker, but this one, it isn't possible to turn it out any quicker. You're doing the trilogy of McCartney, or maybe more than three with a bit of luck.
Mm.
Um, but there's two of you, and it's a more I'm not diminishing what you're doing because obviously it's a huge project all the same, but nonetheless it's one artist
Right.
and one body of work.
Mhm.
Um, so it doesn't really compare. But I'm working on my own and with a very, very, very big story to tell. And my problem is I've got too much. I've just got too much research. I've been out there for so long, getting in so many things to write about that now I'm in treacle because if I had about 100th of what I've got, it would be a lot easier. But because I've got such a dense amount of material that I've got to make an interesting book out of, it's actually quite slow progress. But it is coming, it is getting there, and I will produce it. I won't necessarily produce it as quick as people want me to, but they couldn't possibly understand what it is that the process I'm going through. They just can't. Other books come out quicker, so why can't yours? Well, other books are different, you know.
I mean, just seeing the amount of work and research that went into 1 year that we saw summed up in this
Yeah,
documentary.
yeah,
Um, I can't begin to tell you the headaches that I develop and the naps that I need to take. And just thinking about the
Hmm.
work that you must put into a day
yeah,
in the history of this band, let alone a few years. It
yeah,
is mind-boggling. I just picture you at the end of a day sitting behind your desk with smoke pouring out of your ears,
yeah.
and you need to like kind of like the brain has to cool and recharge, and it's unbelievable, and you're doing it alone.
Yeah, the surprising thing is my capacity for it has not diminished at all. And I know there are people in my life who expect me to be bored by what I do. And on the surface, you would think, well, it's reasonable assumption because it's been working on the Beatles in one way or another for over 40 years now, um, full time. And this
Right.
particular project already 23 years since I started this trilogy,
Wow.
which is crazy. And I turn up bits of it that I've forgotten all about because they're 20 odd years ago and every day is a full day. But I do not get bored, not for an instant. I
It's
really don't.
wonderful.
It's
Yeah.
extraordinary. It speaks out something of my personality, but also in particular the breadth and depth of the Beatles story is just so endlessly interesting that I can't get bored. Do any of you get bored by the Beatles?
Never.
No,
Never,
Never.
true.
never. No.
Nope.
No.
I mean, it's
Nope.
the stuff of life, and as the world outside the window gets more and more and more depressing, so the Beatles become more and more and more attractive
Yeah.
Yeah.
and
Seem necessary
necessary for humans' well-being.
Mhm.
for our mental.
Knowing the amount of work though that is now going into book two of three, if
Yeah.
could you see yourself tackling this if you knew what you were getting into back on day one when you began writing Tune In?
No, I'd quite like to have retired by now. Although I would never have done nothing, I would have always done something. But
Right,
nonetheless, I didn't. I could have done without the pressure that I still have,
right,
and will have pretty much until the day I go, I think. But on the other hand, what a privilege to be in the position of beetling all day long,
right,
and being associated with the greatest subject of them all.
And you want to get it right. I mean,
right,
that's
exactly.
Yeah.
that's that's the thing. And like you said earlier in our conversation here, I love that you said that every piece of paper tells a story.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that really comes through in the documentary, but just in general. So following, putting these puzzle pieces together, that
Yeah.
takes time.
Hundreds of thousands of pieces of paper for the next two books. Hundreds of
Mm.
thousands, and
Wow.
it's complicated, and conflicting and contradictory, and there's a lot to wade through.
Mhm.
Um, but it's a great thing to be doing, and I'm not complaining for a moment. I just underestimated how long it would take. I thought 12 years for all three books.
Mhm.
And possibly it was on that basis because it was quite an unusual proposition for a publisher to take on a trilogy. But they did take it on, perhaps thinking in 12 years they'd have it all. But here we are all these years on, and they've had one. And I feel bad about that, but I'm not being hassled about it, amazingly. All the pressure is coming from myself, knowing that I've just got to get on with it, got to get on with it. But it's a thrill. It's an absolute thrill, and it calls upon talents that I happen to have. I just was born with certain skills, and this project requires those skills. So it's all something I can do. There isn't any element of it where it's, that's beyond my thinking. I can do it. I've got the right kind of brain and the right aptitude. It's just yeah, it's a heavy burden at the moment because I need to crack on. The race now is against my own mortality
Mm.
rather than against a deadline.
Mhm.
Do
It's a
you
re
envision there being two volumes like with the first one, where you put out a shorter edition and then a larger scale expanded edition?
Yes, that's extremely likely, I would say. But this time I want that edition to come out first before the abridged edition.
Okay.
So I was a bit uncomfortable with the way the publishers handled that last time. Now, my American publisher didn't think that the American market would want the two books in a box. And it took some time before it actually came out in America. And I think a lot of
Yeah.
American fans had to get an import copy from the UK, which
Yes.
was expensive,
Yeah.
and that embarrassed me. But I was unable to do anything about it. But I'm going to try and ensure that they do the two books in a box first. I mean, we live in a world now where people's attention span is ever diminishing, right?
Hmm.
And all the content is fed for people who flit from one topic to the next in seconds. And I'm writing a book that's taking years and going to take months to read, two of them. So I'm quite happy to be bucking that trend. You know, as things get more and more skimpy, I'm going to produce something really big.
So you're sure that
Is
the
it?
full edition is only going to be 2 volumes?
We'll find out. It really depends how many pages they can get in a binding. It's a
Mhm.
publishing decision, not my own.
Mm.
Right.
I mean, I'm writing what needs to be written. That was the thing about Tune In. I wrote the story that needed to be written, and there was some talk about editing it down, and there was even talk about having somebody else edit it down and not me. Absolutely not. I mean, I'd rather pull the whole thing and give the money back if they were going to do that.
Mm.
Is that you singing on the closing theme over the credits at the end of the movie?
Yes, it is. That's me.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's me singing "What a Crazy World, What a
Yeah,
Crazy World We're Living In" by Joe Brown. Yeah.
that's funny.
There's a
Well, that's
band.
how you make your extra income. That's how
Yeah.
you can make.
Why
You
don't you
can
make
be
a
a singer.
record? You should cut an
Well,
album.
it was actually done about 3 years ago or thereabouts. There's a band in America, I think East Coast band called Bambikino,
Hmm.
and they play the Beatles' Hamburg set, and they just play a good hard rocking set. They don't do Beatles hits; they do the Hamburg stuff. And
Uh-huh.
the BBC, the Decca, the early stuff. And they asked me if I would do What a Crazy World We're Living In, and so they sent over the backing track, and I took it to a local studio and just dubbed the vocal on. Did it in one take, actually.
Wow.
And then I did a second take as well, and they chose a second take, but either one of them could have been used. So I was very proud of that.
I will admit this. I'm just doing my own research as you're talking, and I was unaware of Bambi Kino. Is that how they say their name? Kino?
Well, it will be like the Ham because Bambikino is where the Beatles stayed
Kino.
when they first went to Hamburg.
Mhm.
Bambikino, yeah.
But a band that I'm a fan of, Not a Surf, one of the members of that group, is in Bambi Kino.
Who is
So
that? Who is that?
Ira Elliott, the
Okay.
drummer from Not a Surf, is
All right.
so
Oh.
you learn something new every day, Darren.
Yeah, well, my friend in the I know them all, but the main guy I know is Mark Rozzo, who's a writer,
Okay,
a very talented cultural writer and creative guy.
Mm.
Yeah,
interesting,
I sang
interesting.
with him at
Okay.
a fest once as well, but I got stage fright when I got up. I'd never sung with a band before, and it's actually quite different from singing at home with a record.
Oh yeah.
Found.
There is, however, everyone out there should know, YouTube of you
Yeah,
singing at fests.
that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, with a
The
toilet.
toilet seat around my
Yes.
neck. Yeah, well, I thought if you're going to do the
Yeah.
hamburg thing, might as well have a toilet seat around your neck.
That has gone down in fest
For
legend.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
gives it some verisimilitude, you know. It's
no, it's a toilet seat. They wanted me to do Hallelujah, I Love Her So, the Ray Charles song, which Eddie
Mhm.
Cochran had also done. Um, and I've known that for 40 years at least, that song. And I have no issue whatsoever singing along with it whenever it comes on. But I got up on stage and all the lyrics went out of my head.
Mhm.
And it was very embarrassing, and I was mortified in front of standing up in front of people to remember none of the words. And I was all for clearing off the stage when one of the guys said, "Should we do one more number? What should we do?" And I went, "Ooh, my soul." I don't know why it came to me, "Ooh, my soul." And they launched into it, and I sang it because I hadn't had to think about it. I hadn't had all that worry of would I remember the words or not, and I sang it. So that's on YouTube, and it's okay. But when they wanted me to do this Joe Brown song, I just learned it. I just sang it like Joe, really. And you need to be in proximity of London to sing that song, because you need to know it's a Cockney song.
Mhm.
It's not just an English song, it's a Cockney song written by Alan Klein,
Yes, I
Yeah, we
noticed.
saw that.
Wow.
but
Not
not
the
Alan
Alan
Klein.
Klein.
Not
Not
the
Alan
Allen Klein.
Klein. Another Alan Klein.
Oh,
Yeah.
not that. Yeah, I
Yeah,
thought that
no,
seemed a
no,
little
no.
weird.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think Alan Klein with an EN wrote any songs.
Yes.
Published a few, but didn't write any.
Yep. Right.
So is it safe to assume that when the next two, after you've done volume two,
Yeah,
that
then
volume three isn't too far behind because you're doing
well,
research for both at the same.
the research, yes, but the assimilation of information will take a period.
Hmm.
Um, it won't be that close behind it, but it's hard to say. I've stopped predicting. And I invite people. I've never said this before, but I invite people to stop waiting for it in a way. It'll come when it comes. Be assured that I'm working on it, that I'm leaving no stone unturned, that I'm not wasting a moment. But pressure doesn't help, because the pressure is already being applied by me anyway, in as much as get it done, get it done, get it done.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's not like any other book. I mean, I've been honored and flattered by the comparisons with Robert Caro, whose LBJ trilogy, which I believe is now 4 books, it has taken him through. He's still not finished, and he must be in his late 80s by now. That isn't a regular biography he's writing, though. Regular biographies can be done in a year or two.
Right.
What he's doing there is something well off the scale in terms of ambition. And I would say that if there is a parallel to be drawn between my work and his, it's not in the writing, because he's a great writer, but in the ambition of it is the same. The ambition is the same. So yeah, other books come and go. I mean, I knew Alan's project before when it was absolutely an embryo of an idea. And now volume one is out, volume two is out, volume three is due next year, is it, or the year after, Alan? I
Let's see.
can't possibly match that.
Mhm.
I'm envious as hell, but I can't match it.
Yep.
Hmm.
And
Well,
I'm
so as
not,
someone would say, we're just, sitting in the la la waiting for the ya ya.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Huh.
It's,
You,
I mean, not to diminish what you're doing, Alan, because obviously it's important and very, very good, but the Beatles one is off all scales. It really is. I wish I could do it quicker.
You may have answered this question, but considering George Harrison's attitude towards Beatle experts, do you think that Paul and Ringo, possibly George, appreciate the work you've done?
I presently have no relationship with Apple Core, but at the same time, I'm reliably informed that my books are in every office.
mm,
And that when the Chronicle came out, it was always referred to within Apple as the Bible,
Nice.
Okay.
which
wow.
which, which means that their attitude towards the author is a bit hypocritical, because if they don't like me, they should throw my books out as well.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Um, Apple is a collective, and one of the consequences of the 1971 to 74 partnership disagreement that they had was that never again could any fundamental decision or any important decision be made unless it had unanimity. because obviously the Klein thing had been 3-on-1.
Hmm.
So and that means that it only takes one person to say no and something won't happen, even if three say yes.
Yeah.
So unless I've got unanimous approval of the board, then I have no approval at all. And I don't have unanimous approval of the board.
Hmm.
And
Mm.
and that's the way it is. It doesn't, the only effect on me is that I'm unable to see their archive, and some other archives I was hoping to get access to that mentioned it to Apple, I was blocked, which is a great shame because it's the Beatles' own history that I'm writing, and these pieces of paper that are of little value or concern to anybody else would enhance the history. It's not as if I'm short of papers, but it
Mm.
would still be something more to learn. Um, but apart from that, I'm not that affected.
Good.
That's
Okay.
good.
I'd rather have a relationship than no relationship, but that's the way it is. But I sent something to Paul just before Christmas, and I got an email the next day. And Ringo, it's okay. There are channels. I can get to him through channels, so it's okay.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I've been there and done it.
Mm.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
You
I
never
said
let.
all along my book had to be seen as unauthorized, and it is. I mean, it
Mhm.
has to be. It's not. I'm not saying that because I don't have authorization. I'm saying I wanted it to be seen as unauthorized.
Sure.
Right.
It's important that it is. Mm.
You never did
Right.
meet John at all in
No,
life, right?
no,
When you started your work on the Beatles, that was after he passed?
no. No. I was writing by then, and I did my research into the Beatles' BBC sessions before he died. I doubt he saw it.
Yeah.
I
Mm.
think he would have. I think he would have enjoyed it because it would have. He had a yen for the history, didn't he, John? Collecting the bootlegs, two of every, one for playing and one for filing away, remember?
Yeah.
And there's that example from late 71 where he was given, I think it was
Yellow matter custard.
yellow matter custard. Thank you. He was
Yeah.
given that and assumed it to be the Beatles Decca test and had extra copies of it struck. Was it acetate he had made or records, white labels, and gave them for Paul and George and Ringo, saying, "Hey, listen to this. We weren't that bad."
Mhm.
Yeah.
Actually, it was BBC tracks he was listening to.
Right.
But you know, he was interested in the Beatles' history more so than I don't know about Paul, but more so than George appeared to be, and Ringo as well, I think.
Wow.
But no, I never got to meet him.
Mm.
Um, I mean, it was his death that hastened a great increase, a great surge in interest in the Beatles
Sure.
that enabled me to function more as a writer, you know.
Mhm.
If you remember back, I mean, certainly in the UK, there was the Beatles were quite passé before John died, and once he died, they were very current for a long time,
Hmm.
and in fact, have never really gone away. Mm. That's a pity that it took a tragedy for it to happen.
Yeah.
Mm. And people say that he died or passed. He was murdered. He was
Yeah.
assassinated.
Hmm.
We shouldn't shy away from saying it like it was. He was assassinated,
Mhm.
Mhm.
and George was nearly stabbed to death.
Yeah.
You know, these people who gave the world so much suffered for it.
Hmm.
Mm.
Mm.
No, even though I'm not a doctor, I think when George got stabbed, that only accelerated his
Yeah.
Yep.
cancer.
You would
Absolutely.
think so, wouldn't you? You would think
Yeah.
so.
Yep.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
trauma.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Totally shocking event.
Mhm.
Mm.
Hmm.
Mm.
All right.
Well, there's a
Okay.
happy note
Anybody?
to finish on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What joy. He comes on here, he talks about murders.
Yeah. Awkward.
I do say murder once in a while. I do say assassinated once in a while. I just
Yeah.
think, sometimes I say passed or died because
Yeah.
it doesn't seem
Yeah.
as tragic, if that
Yeah.
even makes any sense.
It seems more peaceful, but if we're to learn anything, then I think the reminder is necessary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
even though it's grim.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Mark, this has been beyond wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you very, very much for having me on your great show. I listen
Thank
often.
you.
I can't say I listen to every episode, but I listen often. And I marvel at the fact that you do this as frequently as you do, and that you speak such sense between you and the guests that you have on. And I get my news from you, Ken,
Thank you.
at the start of every episode. So you perform a service, and I'm very happy to be on your show. Thank you for
Oh,
having me on.
That's quite the compliment. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you,
thank you,
Mark.
Mark. Yes,
Pleasure.
absolutely. And
All
take your
right.
time when you're done,
Yes.
whenever it happens. The
My
door's
biological
open for you
clock
here.
is the race. I'm gonna win that race.
All right.
I forgot to ask one last thing because it does say that there's a Blu-ray out for Evolver
Yeah, there is. Yeah.
62.
Yes, it is.
Is there any extra material on that?
I don't think so. I've not.
Okay.
No, I'm pretty sure there is. Now, I haven't seen the physical product myself yet.
Mine's coming on Monday in the mail. I
How
ordered
good
my
that you're
copy.
still buying physical product, even though
Uh,
you could be streaming it.
no, see. I work in radio, and here is the remnants of the last show, my last show. It's got to be in a physical. It's here in my hand, believe me. I'm
Okay.
trying to get them on camera. There are CDs
There.
here. All
Oh,
right.
right. Yeah.
I am a physical format guy. If it isn't in my hand, it doesn't exist. And
Right.
when I do talk to label reps and music promoters about getting a new album or something like that, I ask for the CD. Oh, we can send you the download. I says you're more than welcome to, but it's not getting played on my show.
And ripping it to a CD yourself doesn't.
No, because too much technology. I've already once knocked out the power grid in the northeast of the United States once
Ah,
downloading something, and I don't tend to do that. It's just I much prefer it to have it on.
Yeah. Well,
So,
you're going to be disappointed
Me too.
quite soon. I mean, the demise of that is coming faster than you think.
yeah.
and yet I
I'm
hear
not
the opposite,
surprised.
that CDs are slowly surviving and making their comeback. So
Uh, I mean, they may not go away, but they won't be bought in sufficient numbers for it to be a financial.
cassettes are back.
That
Are they
amazes
really?
me.
Are they
Yeah,
really back? Are they
That
yeah, they
really?
are back.
amazes me. Yeah.
What is it? What artist has a new a lot of veteran artists are coming out with things, and they are coming out on cassette. And I
Right.
forget who I just saw recently. I think the Black Keys from Akron, Ohio, new album.
Yeah.
They always put stuff out on cassette.
Huh. And do you buy it?
So what?
Do you buy it?
Yes, look, my wife may be listening. So yeah, sometimes I do. But
Right. Right.
anyway,
Very good. Very
Mark,
good.
this has been
Keep up.
marvelous. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you, Mark.
Right.
thank you, Mark.
Lovely to
Yes,
see you all.
Good to see
Much,
take
you.
care. Be
Yeah.
well.
Thank you. I will. You too.
Mm,
Bye-bye.
much success with Evolver 62.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Ken.
Thank you. Well, how can that not be impressive? Mark Lewisohn always impresses you and comes up with information you never knew before about the Beatles. It's such a joy to have him here on this show. You're welcome anytime, Mark. Give us a ring. You have a spot here whenever you want it.
Absolutely.
So, before we go, let's tell the folks what we've been up to. Darren, we'll start with
Yes. I've been up to here, to be honest with you, in snow.
me
Yeah, we
too.
got the noises from the valley on WKZE Friday night, 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. Um, as I mentioned, I guess at the top of the show, that Thursday this week, the 26th, is my 42nd anniversary on the radio. And since September, no, actually, no, it's been since November. I've been at WKZE with Noises from the Valley. So tune in at WKZE.com unless you happen to be in Dutchess County, New York State, in the Hudson Valley, Catskills, I guess, technically area, Western Connecticut, WKZE at 98.1 FM and 105.9 FM. But everyone, you can tune in at WKZE.com. And I actually have been had some Beatle themes that have just sort of developed as I was putting the shows together. And I think coming up pretty soon, I'm going to do a little 50th anniversary spotlight on Wings of the Speed of Sound. Um, and I've sort of declared February this month with the Man on the Run documentary coming out as Wings Month. So I've been playing a Wings tune the past couple of Fridays, but lots of other stuff going on. Tune in Friday nights, 7 to 11 p.m. Noises from the Valley, and then it's archived for a period of time, I guess a couple of weeks after. You could listen on demand at WKZE.com. Look for me on Facebook, 2 Facebook pages. Contact me there and we'll be in touch.
Very good, sir. Okay, Alan.
Okay. I'm just working on volume 3 of Legacy, and that's going to be my answer to what I'm up to for quite a while. Um, you can find me on Facebook at either Allan Kozinn or Allan Kozinn Remixed, or you can email me at allankozinn@gmail.com. You can email all of us, the three of us, and I don't know if you want to write to Kit, we can get the message to her at Things We Said Today radio show at gmail.com. And we are on former Twitter at Things We Said Fab and BlueSky at Things We Said Today. And our Facebook page, Things We Said Today video podcast. Check out our YouTube page. Subscribe to it if you haven't already. Click like on the shows, all that stuff. You can also find us on Podbean if you just want to hear the audio version. And Podbean distributes to Apple Podcasts and iHeartMusic and all kinds of other places. So there's no excuse for not being able to find us anywhere. And that's about it for me.
Okay. Before I give you my information, a reminder you can always catch Kit on the Talk More Talk channel. Catch all the older shows that we did
Yeah.
on Talk More Talk as well as the new ones. You can watch the latest show that we've done here with Kit and then watch it on Talk More Talk. Make a comparison, do an A/B if you want to. And of course, Kit also has her other podcast, Toppermost of the Poppermost, which you should check out. And as for me, you can always email me at everylittlething@att.net. You can friend me on Facebook under Ken Michaels. And be sure to catch my own YouTube channel, Ken Michaels Radio. Last 2 weeks, 2 really good shows for Yoko Ono's birthday. She just turned 93. God bless her. I had Madeline Baccaro on. She is the author of The Ultimate Book on Yoko, to learn everything there is to know about Yoko and to understand her as an artist and as a songwriter, called In Your Mind, The Infinite Universe of Yoko Ono. And she listed her top 5 Yoko Ono songs and explained why. And also, I did a real fun show, Beatles Preferences show, which we did actually the very first one with the Things We Said Today reunion panel with Alan and Darren and Steve Marinucci and Al Sussman. And this is when I take songs or albums, and there's 2 or 3 of them, and I have my guests choose which ones they prefer to listen to and explain why. The explanation is really the meat and potatoes of the show. And it's fun to get different opinions all the time. And I had Ken Womack on the show with what I called Ken's posse of other co-authors with him, Jason Krupa and Scott Fryman, who I mentioned in the news. They're writing books with Ken as we speak. And Jason also wrote the book on George Harrison and Eric Clapton, All Things Must Pass Away. So that's a real fun show. And I'd love to hear from all of you who watch it what your thoughts are, not only about the show, but of the choices I gave and what you would pick. It's a lot of fun. It really is. If you can, check it out. It's at Ken Michaels Radio. There will be a new show coming tomorrow. As I said in the news, there's a brand new multimedia show that's that Charles Rosenay has put together with Kevin Soling called the Birth, Death, and Rebirth of the Beatles. We'll find out what that's all about. I'm pretty sure they're going to be running it at the Beatles convention in Liverpool, which happens every year at the end of August. So that'll be on Ken Michaels Radio. Please subscribe to my channel if you can. Subscribe to all of our channels. And don't forget my radio show, Every Little Thing, which you can listen to as it is broadcast live on WFDU in New Jersey, Saturday mornings at 6 a.m. and Sunday mornings at 8 a.m. And you can also listen through their archival page of the last 2 weeks of my shows. I also just want to mention real fast that right now WFDU is in the middle of their pledge drive, which they do every February. If you're a fan of the radio station, and they do so many great programs, they not only run my show, but there's a vast array of great programming. They're known for their oldies, and they play all kinds of oldies, well-known ones, deep cuts, but they have all kinds of great shows. Our good friend Ghosty, who's been a guest on my channel many times, he has his own show. Um, and I also wanted to mention, if you can, to please make a contribution. You can do it in the name of your favorite shows that they have there on the channel. You go to WFDU.FM. But several months ago, we had a veteran of radio, kind of in a way a legend in radio. Mark Chernoff joined the radio station
Yeah.
to do a radio shift. He's more or less semi-retired now, but he does a radio shift Wednesdays from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. This is Eastern time. And he is the guy who hired me on WDHA back in 1983. I did my Beatles radio show on college radio for a year and a half. Mark took my show. It's my first big break in radio. And I did the show there at the radio station in New Jersey for 10 years. Wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for Mark. He does an oldie show from 9 to 1 on Wednesdays, but he went on to be the program director of several classic rock stations in New York City, as well as WFAN, which is their sports radio station. Program director of several radio stations in New York, in the biggest market. While he was at WNEW, which many of you I'm sure are a fan of, he got to know a lot of the classic DJs, one of which was Scott Muni, who was a big friend in the whole Beatle community. After John Lennon was assassinated, Scott Muni did a feature on WNEW every Wednesday, was it? Where he started his show with a Beatle break. And this was as a tribute to John and to the Beatles. Since Mark came to know Scott, Mark's now carrying on that tradition. And on Wednesdays at 12 o'clock noon, he's going to do a Beatle break as a tribute to Scott and John and the Beatles. So in addition to my show on Saturday and Sunday mornings, you've also got this Beatle break from Mark, and it's really a nice tribute to a legendary DJ as well as to John and the Beatles. So if you can, please check that out. It's WFDU.FM. And that's about it. I think I covered everything. So on behalf of Allan and Darren and Kit and our special guest, Mark Lewisohn, thanks to all of you for watching. Go see Evolver 62 if you can, streaming on many different platforms. And
Or buy the Blu-ray.
what's that? Or
Or
buy
buy the Blu-ray.
or DVD. And happy birthday, George. Okay.
Yes.
Thanks to all of you for watching. We'll see you next time.